welcome to today's edition of Disbar, the Florida Bar. I am your host, Les Winston, and I'm with you every weekday from 2 to 3 p.m. right here on The Biz in South Florida. And we also stream live on www.disbarthefloridabar.com. We stream worldwide, so this show has tremendous range, and we are, of course, asking for your help to maintain the show on the air. We can use contributions. Those contributions can be made through the website at www.disbarthefloridabar.com. And it is very important that we maintain the show and continue the process to change the way lawyers are disciplined and to clean up the corruption at the head of the Florida Bar. We have been telling stories of individuals who are victims of the Florida Bar's corruption, victims either financially, in some cases physically victims, and in some cases the death of an individual has been caused by the laxity of the Florida Bar. So this is a very important problem here in Florida. It is creating a lot of rotten apples because the good old boys club is protecting themselves, and it's very difficult to get a level playing field if you're involved in the courts in Florida in many instances. My guest this afternoon is Eliot Bernstein. Eliot, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Eliot, what is your current position? Are you an attorney?
No, I'm not. I'm an inventor.
Okay, and you have patents, I assume, for your inventions?
I have patents that are suspended pending investigations for my inventions.
And how are you involved with the Florida Bar? Let's get the basic premise of this. How did the Florida Bar have an effect on you?
My Florida attorneys, Proskauer Rose, basically attempted to steal my intellectual properties, and one of the avenues of relief I sought was the Florida Bar.
So you filed a complaint against Proskauer and Rose for what? For basically violating your attorney-client privilege, or what was
a whole lot of issues. You know, I also filed against my attorneys almost identical complaints with the federal patent bar, which is headed by Harry Mose of the Office of Enrollment and Discipline. And there, after he had questioned why the Florida Bar and the New York Attorney Disciplinary Committees had reviewed the same information that I had sent him and they had done nothing, he began an investigation whereby he directed me to file with the Commissioner of Patents claims of fraud on the Patent Office by the lawyers who fraudulently submitted oaths of application to the U.S. Patent Office. And so those same lawyers are under investigation at the Federal Patent Bar, and at the Florida Bar and New York Bar we found that they were bulletproof, basically, at both places, until we discovered that the people handling the complaints in both states were actually Proskauer Rose people who were officers of the Florida Bar handling their own complaints against their firm and doing all kinds of things to railroad and whitewash the complaints. And then only all too recently in New York, we have an unfolding whistleblower case of a New York Supreme Court staff attorney who's blown the whistle on the New York attorney regulatory body, including the one that oversees Wall Street, whereby she's claiming that there were favored law firms and lawyers and a cleaner in the ethics department named Naomi Goldstein, who was cleaning complaints for these favored law firms and lawyers, as well as U.S. attorneys, district attorneys, assistant district attorneys, and she also points to illegal representation by the New York Attorney General Andrew Cuomo's offices in efforts to stymie the complaint process. That she mentions me in her original lawsuit she files, and she filed that in a federal court under Judge Shira Shinlin, who then took my lawsuit, which is now a $12 trillion lawsuit, naming the Florida Bar and the Florida Supreme Court, along with a whole host of other lawyers, judges, regulators, and prosecutors in New York and Florida.
You're saying $12 trillion?
Correct, $12 trillion.
Okay.
The patents that were stolen were likened by leading engineers around the world to electricity. So I don't know what the value of electricity has been since Edison, but so far the technologies have driven the internet to the levels that it's at and driven imaging to all new levels.
Mm-hmm.
And they're used on pretty much every digital imaging and video product.
Is the New York...
There was a lot at stake for these lawyers. You know, this wasn't a small heist of, you know, a little patent. This is one of the largest inventions of the digital imaging time. Probably more powerful at this point than the operating system is the media that drives the internet.
Okay, so let me just reiterate that a little bit because it's a lot to digest in a short period of time. You invented a system. You invented something that was extremely powerful, and your attorneys, Proskauer and Rose, according to what you've told me, you have accused them of stealing your patent, and when you realized what they had done, you reported them to the Florida bar. And you reported them to the New York bar as well?
It's the New York disciplinary departments. The bar is it's also useless in New York, but it's less useful because disciplinary actions happen through the appellate court disciplinary committees.
And is that better than what happens in Florida?
No, they both are terrible. In fact, when I spoke to the New York Senate Judiciary Committee, which is investigating the whistleblower stuff, you know, my suggestion was blow up these bar associations. They're nothing more than basic drinking establishments for lawyers, and, you know, turn all of this infraction, conflicts, et cetera, into felonies and triple the penalties if they violate the public trust and their legal titles. And, you know, put these guys, you know, like any other criminal, not outside the law. I'm also suing in that same lawsuit Greenberg-Traurig, as well as Foley and Lardner, and a few other law firms that were involved in Central 2. Greenberg-Traurig was my patent attorney for part of the time, and now they're representing the Florida bar in New York against me in my lawsuit. And again, ignoring conflicts, because conflicts is how these guys operate. It's the glue that binds their whole RICO-type criminal law firm enterprises together. So they can get anything done they need to get done to protect themselves. Is that basically what you feel? You know, absolutely. An FBI investigator explained it to me that the most insidious crime is a law firm that's corrupted, and where I was bringing in a RICO of several law firms, very powerful firms, that could penetrate, you know, basically the regulatory body. So voila, the regulatory body with the ethics department in New York has a cleaner, and they're whitewashing attorney complaints for U.S. attorneys and whatnot. You're talking a complete takeover, a coup on the legal system by these, I call them dirty, rotten RICO enterprise law firms that are nothing more than criminals using law firms as a front organization. And then wherever they need a regulation broke, you know, I saw some of the Allen Stanford stuff where Proskauer, Tom Slobjam, the partner there, was in a Miami airport teaching Stanford employees how to lie to FBI and SEC investigators. You know, so we see the SEC regulator in Madoff. We see Proskauer has the most clients, and people handling the distribution of Madoff are Proskauer-related. Mark Dreyer's got relations to lawyers. They're all lawyers, and they're able to penetrate the regulatory bodies to, you know, lower banking regulations. And why are they not also? Why haven't they also penetrated the United States Senate, United States? They have. Congress in general. They've also penetrated the executive branch. You have a president that's an attorney. They have. Okay, so that's a huge control issue if they can regulate themselves into this kind of power. Well, they don't. That's exactly. It's not regulate themselves. You mean?
Yeah.
I mean, they have the power to regulate themselves, which is a power that's insane that the people would ever grant, which they didn't grant. It's been legally misused. You know, they've created law for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're investigating themselves. That's the biggest joke in the world, and it fails. They can't handle any evidence, and they end up having to keep all of the people out of court through these, you know, dubious denials of due process to people to steal their property, whether it be their patents or, you know, in some instances they're outright torturing people in Guantanamo. And if we look at that, you know, we find you and Bebby and a bunch of lawyers.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, it's lawyers have, you know, these aren't lawyers, these are criminals.
And so, but in New York, there was a little bit of a different arrangement in the sense that there was a New York staff attorney. When you say, I guess that's somebody that is actually hired and paid by the state of New York to operate on the staff of a disciplinary committee. Is that how that works?
Correct. And she was handling complaints, and she makes allegations in an open U.S. federal court before Judge Sheriff Shinlin that, you know, they were whitewashing, destroying documents for favored law firms, for the U.S. attorney, the DA, and the ADA. I mean, it was John Gotti was being tried upstairs 2 floors up, and there was no cleaner at his trial.
Right.
But there was a cleaner at the ethics department in New York.
Right.
The ethics department, like the highest office of law in New York, is run by, well, actually, this guy that I'm charging in my lawsuit, Tom Cahill, the former chief counsel of that department, who blocked my complaints, he resigned amidst an ethics scandal where they were bringing hookers into the ethics department of New York. I mean, so, you know, if this is what you call ethics, that's the system that I believe exactly is replicated here in Florida, where people are being threatened, people who are going to do good things. Like, you know, for example, there's a clerk of the court, Deborah Yarbrough of the Supreme Court of Florida. You know, she did a solid for me. She, you know, pointed out that the conflicts that I was accusing the Florida bar of and their total, you know, violations of law were in fact wrong, and got me to petition to the Florida Supreme Court, where, you know, again, it started out good, but then who knows what the, you know, the threats are. When we look at Anderson, this is a woman who testifies she was afraid to come out of her office. She's 60-plus years old. She was afraid to come out of her office, that they were stalking her. In fact, on Nicole Corrado in New York, another staff attorney of the First Department Appellate Division Departmental Disciplinary Committee, where Anderson works.
Okay.
Nicole Corrado was on her way to testify for Anderson, and senior officers of the Supreme Court of New York threatened her, and this is in a federal lawsuit. That's federal obstruction, extortion by the court people. I mean, it's out of control. It's so out of control and ridiculous that, you know, I mean, I don't know what these bars are all about or what they're for, but they're to block lawyers from getting charged with felony misconduct. And you can see the state and country falling apart from it. And everywhere you look, every scandal, Ponzi, bank, derivative, nonsense crap is all Ivy League lawyers.
Ivy League lawyers, well, I don't want to pick on all Ivy League lawyers, but you're...
I would.
Yeah,
I mean... Say that at this point, that whole hemisphere of education is corrupted.
Okay.
And that the colleges are being actually training children in the wrong way of law, which is this, you know, criminal kind of break the law using law for your own advantage. Skirting. And there's no scruples, there's no ethics. If what I saw in New York is the ethics department, we're in a whole world of literally, imagine, this is the Wall Street ethics department washing U.S. attorney complaints. I mean, it's unheard of what she disclosed in Gotham that day. Or being actually training children in the wrong way of law, which is this, you know, criminal kind of break the law using law for your own advantage.
skirting.
And there's no scruples. There's no ethics. If what I saw in New York is the ethics department, we're in a whole world of literally. Imagine this is the Wall Street ethics department washing U.S. attorney complaints. I mean, it's unheard of what she disclosed in Gotham that day.
Mm-hmm.
And she did it in a federal court. I would assume that Andrew Cuomo is all over this with at least an investigation, meaning his office was defending the state defendant she was accusing, and thereby failing to even investigate the public officials. Notice how the conflicts, again, work to deny any prosecution of these people who have placed themselves above the law.
How do you define your being a victim now of the Florida bar? How would you define that?
Well, how do they rape you? Molest you?
Yeah, well, that was...
Molest your life? Well, you asked that, and I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
And I prefaced it with those words because they allowed somebody to put a bomb in my car and attempt to murder my 3 children, including Justice Jorge Labarga, who was the West Palm Beach fixer of the Bush-Gore election, and we all owe him a thanks for the Bush pick he gave us. And for that, he got elected within the criminal organization and got to the Supreme Court from his felonious conduct, as well as conduct directly in my lawsuit, a lawsuit that's even more bizarre. But how do you feel? I feel like all of those people at the bar, at the Florida Supreme Court, and even at the West Palm Beach, Judge Labarga's court, that, they blocked all my rights to get into court, meaning I'm trying to sue lawyers and judges and, regulators and state officials, and they were all afraid to let me into a courtroom to present my evidence, which is, beyond a reasonable doubt. They were caught stealing the patents.
Right.
One lawyer putting 90 patents in his own name. Beyond.
Beyond is right.
And so you feel completely raped, sodomized, without your legal rights by the very people who are supposed to be entrusted to uphold those rights. And so I always say to people, one of the related cases to the whistleblower, including my lawsuit, is Gisela Weishaus, a famous Nazi Holocaust survivor who won the Swiss Bank Money Awards several years ago. And I was talking to her as she was getting beat up in the courts and denied due process from the same judges and writing great pleadings but completely getting denied. I said, well, Gisela, it's like going to the Gestapo and telling them the camp guards are treating you bad and the food sucks.
It's a funny statement, but it's not funny, haha.
Okay, so in New York, where Anderson blew the whistle on these guys, I immediately stepped outside my lawsuit and said to the entire Second Circuit and U.S. District Court, freeze. I actually filed a motion to compel, and I'm about to file a motion to kiss my ass, which is to tell them, freeze, you're under arrest. She just pointed to every lawyer in New York. She said, not in New York, actually here in Florida maybe too, because she said favored lawyers and law firms. She said U.S. attorneys. She fingered every lawyer in New York as being part of this this disciplinary system gone amok. And until we know who these lawyers are that she's blowing the whistle on, who these prosecutors are, the U.S. attorneys, I charge them all with criminal obstruction of justice because she points out the same conflicts of interest, document destruction, and everything I've been complaining about from these bar agencies who do nothing but abuse people. They do absolutely nothing. In fact, what they do is they give lawyers a chance. I would never send another complaint or tell everybody not to send any complaints to the bars. Just file criminal actions against your attorneys for either misdemeanors or felony misconduct. And stay away from the bars because you're giving all your evidence to the lawyers in advance, and they, in conflict, could go handle their own cases. In both cases in New York and Florida, I found prosecutor partners violating the Florida bar rules and the New York bar rules, not bar rules, but disciplinary rules. And in both instances, that's where Deborah Yarber of the Florida Supreme Court helped me get up to the Supreme Court. And in New York, 5 justices ordered people from Proskauer and the guy who put the 90 patents in his name, Ray Joa, ordered for investigation by 5 justices. Now, that got derailed because these guys are great at penetrating all of the, because of their legal titles, they're almost accepted into, prosecutorial, judge, you name it, a legal degree will get you in the door. And where you're defending your life, these firms like Greenberg and Proskauer and Foley and Lardner here in Florida, right now there's also a Florida philanthropist, Monty Friedkin, who was run the same, steal his intellectual properties from his company by the same ring of Proskauer, Foley, gang of guys here in Florida. And, obviously, if you control the bars and you're able to handle your own complaints against yourself in conflict and violation of the rules, then you should fear not stealing from anybody. And so then again, I would remind everybody not to go to a patent attorney. File your own patents and now they're trying to make it first to file. Actually, some of the people who I'm accusing have placed people inside the patent office recently through Obama, including David Kapos of IBM and some other people from Foley and Lardner, where they're trying to get it first to file, and then, you'll always be 2 steps behind your lawyer.
My guest this afternoon is Eliot Bernstein. Eliot is an inventor, and he had invented some extremely valuable patented items that were taken from him by his Florida attorneys, and has been going through a process of trying to recapture what was taken from him in the courts, and has basically run into exactly what I'm talking about on this program, which is a very high level of corruption at the disciplinary level, and recommends that rather than go through the disciplinary process, that you file criminal complaints against the attorneys. We're going to put a pin through that, and when we come back from this short commercial break, we're going to talk a little bit more with Eliot Bernstein about how that would work, and also to try to get a clearer understanding of exactly what the process is if you are damaged by an attorney in the state of Florida, which is where we are. And now also it's you're saying that the state of New York has got some problems as well. But we're going to touch on that when we come back. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar, and we're with you every weekday here from 2 to 3 right here on The Biz in South Florida, 880 a.m. on the dial. And we also stream live on www.disbarthefloridabar.com. I know that that's probably a funny name for a radio show and a funny name for a website, but it's a true name because what we're trying to do is to disbar the Florida Bar and stop the bar from being the entity that disciplines attorneys in the state of Florida. The attorneys are disciplining themselves, and as a result, it's created a very dangerous good old boys network and created a lot of rotten apples, and it is very difficult to overcome those handicaps when you're involved in lawsuits against those in power, and you are denied honest services from the Florida Bar because they are a controlling entity in the state of Florida to such a degree that nothing can be done to correct that problem, short of eliminating them through the corruption at the head. And we have talked about the corruption of John Harkness, who is the executive director of the Florida Bar, in that he does sit on the board of the Florida Lawyers Mutual Insurance Company, which is a for-profit insurance company. So here you have someone who is the head of a state agency, also operating in his capacity as a director on a for-profit insurance company. That for-profit insurance company's objective is to protect lawyers who are sued for malpractice, and that in and of itself is a conflict of interest that should have been investigated a long time ago. We have a governor who has impaneled the state grand juries to ferret out corruption in the judiciary, and to date, even though we've noticed everybody in the executive branch, everybody in the federal U.S. Attorney's Office with regard to this individual's conflicts, nothing has happened. They do go after others of less power. We see that daily in the newspapers where they've gone after commissioners, school board commissioners, trying to make the appearance that they are ferreting out corruption, and yet they're leaving corruption at the highest level in place, and that's a level that affects all of us. You are going to be affected at some time in your life by an unfair playing field when it comes to the law. And when you go into a court in that scenario, if you are not part of the powerful group, you stand to lose no matter what. And they are taking money from senior citizens, from the guardianship programs. They're taking money from the bankruptcies. They're taking money and property from individuals in every way they can because they are able to. Now, we're not saying that all attorneys are bad. We're not suggesting that all attorneys do illegal things. We're not doing anything of the kind. What we're saying is that there is a network of protected attorneys who are powerful law firms, who are insiders, who get the benefit of the benefit of protection from this racketeering operation, and that's what needs to be corrected. We're going to be back with my guest Eliot Bernstein, who has been affected as a victim by having patents stolen from him. He has a $12 trillion lawsuit against many of the entities that we've been discussing, including New York entities. And we'll be back with Eliot after the short commercial break. Don't go away. My name is Les Winston, and I host Disbar, the Florida Bar, right here on the Biz in South Florida.
The United States Trustees Program is the largest organized criminal element in the world.
In Florida, all other professionals except lawyers are governed by the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Only lawyers regulate themselves through the Florida Bar.
Because the Florida Bar is controlling all three branches of government now. We have attorneys in all three branches. There's a system out of control. There's no more check and balance.
This has created a very dangerous good old boys club and a lot of rotten apples.
Sue me.
Tune in each weekday from 2 o'clock to 3 p.m. and listen to stories of individuals who have been affected by the corruption of the Florida Bar. We want you to be aware of the problem that we have with this disciplinary agency. Join us every weekday, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. right here on The Biz. And we're back. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar. My guest this afternoon is Eliot Bernstein. Eliot is a very knowledgeable individual, a very smart person who has been affected, having had patents. He's an inventor. He certainly is someone who can figure out chess games and figure out the intricacies of these interwoven parties. Eliot, I wanted to go back to your comment before where you said that rather than file a complaint with the Florida Bar or with the New York Bar or with any of the bar associations, the first thing you should do is file a criminal complaint against the attorney with a law enforcement agency.
Correct.
Yeah, I did that. I was a victim, and in my capacity as a director of Barron's Stores, which was a well-known men's retailer here in South Florida. I became involved about 4 years ago, 6 years ago actually, in a process where they were trying to collect in a lawsuit against 3 attorneys for malpractice, and one of the attorneys for the other side proffered counterfeit documents from the United States Bankruptcy Court, brought them into a state court, and I went to the Dade County Corruption Unit, Dade County Police Corruption Unit, and reported him to the Corruption Unit. And what they did was they sent it to they did the intake, they did the investigation. They didn't have to do much investigation because I provided them with the document and I provided them with an independent forensic expert's opinion under oath that was a counterfeited document. And what they did was they took it to the state attorney, to the state's attorney's office, and the state's attorney's office said, well, we're not in a position to determine whether this is really a counterfeited document or not, and this is there's something going on in the courts, so let the courts decide. What do you think would happen in most cases where you file a criminal complaint against an attorney?
Well, the problem is far larger. Mm-hmm. Because, Alberto Gonzalez tipped you off that the Justice Department had been top down.
Mm-hmm.
that attorneys were being replaced, similar to what Anderson was claiming that they, she was complaining that they were doing wrong things and document destruction and whitewashing, and they were pushing her out the door with heavy-handed approaches. Remember, my assumption starts with these are mobsters. They're not lawyers. They're people who look like lawyers, but lawyers don't act like this. Obviously, they have ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And there are good lawyers. But what's taken over is more like a mob atmosphere within the legal community. And that extends all the way up to White House counsel. That extends all the way up to the regulators at the highest levels of our government who have failed us. And notice they're all coming from or going to law firms, a certain group of law firms.
Mm-hmm.
And so my assumption is it's a criminal RICO top-down.
Mm-hmm.
That attorneys were being replaced, similar to what Anderson was claiming that they, she was complaining that they were doing wrong things and document destruction and whitewashing, and they were pushing her out the door with heavy-handed approaches. Remember, my assumption starts with these are mobsters. They're not lawyers. They're people who look like lawyers, but lawyers don't act like this. Obviously, they have ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And there are good lawyers. But what's taken over is more like a mob atmosphere within the legal community. And that extends all the way up to White House counsel. That extends all the way up to the regulators at the highest levels of our government who have failed us. And notice they're all coming from or going to law firms, a certain group of law firms.
Mm-hmm.
And so my assumption is it's a criminal RICO enterprise that has infiltrated all of the legal system, including all the way up at the U.S. federal level. Obviously, Anderson saying whitewashing was going on for U.S. attorneys brings it to the federal level, as well as the DA and ADA.
Mm-hmm.
So where you're in a state where your ADA and DA and U.S. attorney, similar to New York and Florida, I would assume, where I've run into the same exact pattern,
mm-hmm. have
been overtaken by criminals, you're back at asking the Gestapo for leniency at the camp.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to get it. Meaning the head of this beast needs to be disassembled, and the way we do that is, lawyers are no longer above the law. All these regulators who lowered the guard in Florida for Stanford or for other banking in New York should all be tried. They shouldn't be making money, and we certainly don't need them as bright people who ruin the system to attempt to fix the system, which makes no sense. And so, until we start grabbing these attorneys, judges, and prosecutors by the neck and hanging them like we used to do in the West
mm-hmm.
when they corrupted, and I'm all for a good lynching of them if they're found guilty of treason against the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I liken this all to treason against the country because they have defeated the game here.
Mm-hmm.
They've found a way to commit criminal acts of stealing and robbing from the people of everything, their homes, their 401ks, their bank accounts, and like I said, most of it comes back to a few Ivy League schools which have been pumping out a bunch of criminal lawyers. And those criminal lawyers have polluted, perverted pretty much everything, and to block complaints against themselves, they've taken over the disciplinary, the ethics committee. They're running whorehouses in the ethics committee. I mean, come on.
Mm-hmm.
It's so outrageous and so ridiculous and such a shame on all of them. They should be disgraced at that Supreme Court. They should hang themselves next.
And
for what they've done to the state and the people, and literally it's all by lowering the regulations and then saying, oh, the regulator fell asleep on the Greenberg truck. I mean, Greenberg was in there lowering the regulations so that they could do these banking deals that were illegal with Stanford, offshore.
And
they should all be charged with felony crimes, not sent to the state bar. You and Baby should be charged with crimes against humanity and not sent to the bar, but sent to a courtroom for federal criminal charges against them. Why being a lawyer gets you to the bar, and then the bar is your peers who are all guilty of the same crimes.
Well, that's the protection. That's the protectionism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what it allows them to do is the bars allow them to feather their caps with vindication letters against the victims on letterhead of the Florida bar.
Right.
And it's a joke.
Right.
It's rules at random. I've got these Florida bar guys breaking. So, in fact, when I caught the Proskauer partner Matthew Triggs in conflict violating his public office position with the bar in a multitude of ways, a guy, Kenneth Marvin, and one of his cohorts, they tried to dismiss the complaint I filed against the guy, and they cited a law, not a law, a draft legislation that they had drafted just days earlier, trying to exculpate the guy from Proskauer from what he was caught doing, which was handling complaints while he was in a blackout period.
Okay.
And so they sent that to me, and it's up on my website at iviewit.tv.
What is the web? I'm sorry. What's the what? Give me the website again.
They actually created a proposed draft legislation to exculpate him from the bar rule he had violated, and tried to dismiss his complaint by sending that to me and saying, "See, here it is, rule number blah." But there was no rule. It had never been enacted. It hadn't even been really run through the Florida Supreme Court yet.
And what do you do? I mean, now they send this to you. It's obviously it's protection for this attorney that they've drummed up, that they've created out of nowhere.
Right.
And when they do that, what do you do with that? Where do you go with that? How do you overcome that? If you go to the Supreme Court with it, what happens in the Supreme Court?
What are you kidding? I'm suing every single one of those judges at the Supreme Court of Florida. I'm suing the State Bar of Florida. And I hope that they're all reporting a $12 trillion federal RICO and antitrust lawsuit to state regulators and insurance auditors and everybody. They better be reporting that they're all sued as defendants in that. I mean, the Florida Bar hopefully isn't hiding a $12 trillion lawsuit from state regulators. I mean, I hope not.
Well, they're certainly hiding it from their own insurance company.
I hope not. I mean, that would be even more criminal. I mean, that's criminal.
Hello?
You're talking more insurance fraud and a whole,
Well, it's bigger than that. Yeah. What is your website?
That could really put the people of Florida in great peril from these crooks. That's if they're. I don't know how state regulators could be that asleep in the state of Florida.
Well,
but
they
I'm
are.
Sure, they're auditing, their books and in compliance are fulfilling all their legal and fiduciary responsibilities that I know they would.
Only when somebody reports a poor schnook that they want to make an example of do they do anything. But if their reporting is about anybody in power, they bury it, they tie it up. Even Rothstein, it's very interesting that Rothstein's case, which certainly is not as significant as Madoff, but it's still very significant, $1.2 billion in a Ponzi scheme. He's been sitting in jail. They're waiting to sentence him. And, of course, the Miami Herald, which is basically an ineffectual a newspaper from the standpoint of reporting anything of consequence, because they're also in bed with a lot of these law firms. It appears to be that way.
Well, the law firms are behind the media at this point too. They control a lot of the media.
Yeah, but what they're doing is they're reporting that Rothstein, because he helped them arrest, or he assisted them in the capture of a mobster who was going to launder money for him. He wore a wire. And
which was his friend, yeah.
Yeah, and as a result of that, they're going to reduce his sentence. And, of course, you look at that, you go, well, probably Rothstein has been negotiating behind the closed doors and telling them, you better get me off, because if you don't give me what I'm asking for, I'm going to tell everything. And I'm sure that they're deathly afraid of that. And your website is, give me the website, please.
My website is www.
Right.
.iviewit, IVIEWIT.TV.
Okay.
And my email is iviewit@iviewit.tv.
Iviewit at
iviewit.tv.
iviewit.tv. Okay. And what is going on? You have several things that you've raised here. What is the status of Anderson's whistleblowing? Is that going anywhere?
It is. It's hopefully going criminal because she came out in a civil case. She won her First Amendment violation of free speech in regard to her whistleblower claims. Mm-hmm. New York, that's how it's ferreted in the courts, a whistleblower. And she lost her money damage claim against 3 of the individuals, but at the same moment, she filed a request for a completely new hearing based on the illegal representation of Andrew Cuomo of the state defendants, claiming that, of course, you have gone to him to investigate these people, and
right.
Instead he's representing them but doesn't bring in a third party to investigate them. What Mr. Cuomo is doing in New York is essentially obstructing justice by representing the guilty party she's accusing
mm-hmm.
and failing his office duty to the people, his honest services, and more.
Mm-hmm.
And he's doing the same thing in my case,
mm-hmm.
representing all these state defendants instead of investigating them.
Mm-hmm.
And by not calling in a third party to represent, what's happened is he's blocked the entire prosecutorial agency that is supposed to investigate corruption of public officials. So now they've got that level steeped in blockage.
Okay.
And so, it's more and more frustrating as you go through this process to see that these guys have really positioned at all of the right stops to deregulate complaints against themselves and insulate them misusing the law. And I always put in my complaints to, the Florida Bar and all these hokey judges and whatnot that, I remind them of the judges' trial of the Nuremberg trials where we tried and convicted to life and more many of the Nazi judges who made it okay to put people in a concentration camp, steal their things, and eventually have them, put their mothers in ovens and stuff.
Well, the interesting thing that was said back in 1949 when the Florida Bar became integrated, there was an opinion by Justice Douglas. There was an opinion that came out in the Lathrop. I think it's Lathrop is the case, where he said that because of these integrated bars, we have to be cautious of what could be created as goose-stepping brigades, alluding to Nazism at that time. And, of course, also in the 1949 integration question, when it was raised at the Supreme Court, one of the dissenters talked about a police state that would evolve. And when you take all of the power that is inherent in the judiciary today because of judicial immunity, that judges can't be sued regardless of what their decisions are in cases.
Well, that's only civilly. Don't let them confuse you. They try to say, it's for criminal, but nobody's above the law in the criminal, and so it's a civil issue. They're trying to claim their immunity, and they're trying to extenuate it and make you think that it extends to criminal acts, but it doesn't. If they act outside the scope criminally, they're as culpable and chargeable as anybody else.
Yeah, but you know what? The only time that I don't know how many complaints there are, but there's probably, tens of thousands of complaints against judges, federal judges who are, appointed for life, and yet there's maybe 2 impeachments in the whole process that have ever come down. But those only occur when the acts are so clear and where they've raped a child in their chambers or something, But other than that,
get off that too.
Yeah, not all the time, but that's those are pretty clear. So they get into trouble with that. But other things that are more complex, it's almost like everybody becomes a total moron and can't figure out what's going on. And they take evidence that you provide to them and they turn it into something other than what you've given them. To make it fit the situation. So what you have this almost like a powerful party, like the Communist Party is in other countries where they're the elite and everybody else is working for them.
Well, now you're getting to my real, conspiratorial side of what's happening, I do believe our country is in the throes of a dictatorship. Sandra Day O'Connor left the bench in her first speech at Georgetown, said, "The country is in the throes of a dictatorship that is better to stop now than later." And I have followed that marching order ever since hearing those words, knowing that our country, the whole country, is in peril of a tyrannous group of treasonous lawyers, and really committed mass treason on the country, on other countries. They've done all kinds of illegal. They feel that there is no law and that they're above the law. So in that, you're correct. You can start pogroms and putting people in Guantanamo and denying rights. And, you're acting exactly like what we broke away from in England. In fact, I'm wondering why we need a Tea Party if we're not in a monarchy.
Right, exactly. That's exactly where we are. We're in a monarchy, and the elite or the aristocrats that are running everything are pretty much attorneys in the House, the Senate, the executive branch, and in of course the judiciary. And they're stealing property from people all the time. My guest is a very knowledgeable Eliot Bernstein. Eliot has had tremendous experience with the judiciary and the judicial process, and with trying to resolve a theft of his property, and it has exploded and just become a huge and massive lawsuit of a $12 trillion claim. And what's interesting, of course, it is against, who are the defendants in your claim? I imagine that there's a roster that goes from page to page.
About 10,000 lawyers between the firms.
Right.
40 or so judges.
Right.
The Supreme Court of Florida, the Florida Bar.
Where does a suit like that get heard, Eliot?
Well, I filed to be related to the whistleblower Anderson.
Okay.
And federal judge Sheriff Shindlin marked it legally related, along with 7 or 8 other cases of abuse in the disciplinary.
Sarah Shindlin is what, a federal
judge at the U.S. District Court, Southern District of New York.
Okay, and this is what is? It sounds to me like she may be a good guy, at least at this point, huh? A good girl.
I say there may be a halo over her head, but we'll see. I've been down the path before with people who are doing the right thing, and when we're hearing that they're threatening witnesses on the way to give deposition in Anderson, who are state employees,
right?
It's getting to a frightening level. As I mentioned, somebody put a bomb in my car. It blew up 3 cars next to me. You can see that on my homepage.
Right.
I was right here in Florida, and I can't even get a press release on it,
right,
published by the press. Or, right now, we're dealing with, if you look at this, my initial comment to you was the lawyers I'm suing in the state bars got letters of recommendation from the state bars.
Okay.
But at the Patent Office, they're under federal investigation for fraud on the United States Patent Office, which Special Agent Stephen Lucchese of the West Palm Beach FBI claimed he was going to join Mr. Hiri Motes of the U.S. Patent Office in bringing to the U.S. attorneys the charges of fraud on the United States. I mean, Mr. Motes, the head of the patent bar for the Patent Office, he's the guy who advised me when he looked at the evidence to file charges of fraud on the United States, not fraud on Eliot or Iviewit, my companies,
right,
but fraud on the United States by these lawyers. Now, that's led to the suspension of my patents in this never-ending suspension, it appears. But obviously, bringing down a corruption ring this large would be a large task, I assume.
Well, it's a huge task. It's the largest task facing us in the country.
So the only people where these guys have gotten any relief is at the state bars. The only way they got that was in conflict. They got caught and all that. That's turned into a big mess. Now there's a whistleblower insider pointing to exactly how this operation works within the state bar, how they're watching the complaints, how Rothstein will probably get elected to the Florida Supreme Court next.
My guest is Eliot Bernstein. Eliot, I want to just take a short commercial break here. This is Disbar the Florida Bar. I am the host, Les Winston. I am with you every day here, every weekday from 2 to 3, right here on The Biz in South Florida. And we are bringing to light stories of victims of the Florida Bar's corruption. In this case, Mr. Bernstein, Eliot Bernstein, had patents that were stolen. He is alleging that they were stolen by Proskauer Rose. He filed complaints with the Florida Bar. The Florida Bar basically whitewashed everything that was brought to their attention, claiming that there was law in place that was contrary to or allowing this to happen, which was never was not part of legislative. It was not finished in the legislature. I think that's correct, right?
They tried to dismiss the complaint based on made-up law that they had just made up a few nights earlier.
And that's a tendency, and that's what we're dealing with here in South Florida and Florida in general.
That was Kenneth Marvin. I don't know if he's still at.
Yeah, Ken Marvin's still there. It's Ken Marvin, John Harkness. These players have been there for a long time, and they're basically operating the entire disciplinary process on a good old boys network. And so Proskauer and Rose is a very large law firm, as the other defendants in your lawsuit, Greenberg Traurig and several other law firms.
Greenberg represents the Florida Bar.
Exactly.
Look at what they filed when I claimed they were conflicted in the federal court as a response. They claim that they're like buddy-buddy with the Florida Bar, the only law firm that handles their, I guess, messy stuff. After Abramoff, I guess they owe him a favor.
Well, the interesting thing, of course, in Abramoff, I was wondering, do you have any comment on the fact that Abramoff got convicted?
Well, my comment is, why didn't the lawyers? And we look back, and who's the lawyer? Right.
There are lawyers behind a lot of these things that are going on.
Now there are lawyers behind Stanford and the deregulation of the banking inside the regulators in Florida. I mean,
that was also Greenberg.
When are you going to put a stop to these criminal law firms that are actually criminal, not criminal law, but criminals running law firms as a front organization? In fact, I make the claim up at my website that most of these Ponzi's, where there's Madoff with $80 billion. Well, there's only been $1 billion found. How many cheeseburgers can a guy eat? Literally. Yeah. Meaning, normally you get a forensic accountant in here, and they find 79 billion more, but they might have been boats, houses, cars, yachts, but there's only so much edible dollars there.
Right.
And so where did all this money go? And what I say is it's all, if you look at the Proskauer involvement with Stanford and Stanford's involvement in money laundering drug cartels from Mexico, which sure sounds like a good law firm to me, you start to see it that the Ponzi schemes are really money laundering operations for the law firms.
Right.
Notice there's lawyers behind all the Ponzi's. Why would lawyers run a Ponzi? They're not. They're money laundering. They're making money disappear, which is all their profits from their stolen real estate frauds, bankruptcy frauds. Now they're in New York taking children frauds, and it's gone nuts.
Well, that's the whole point. Even the way that these things come down is generally directed. The way that the people are able to do this, they're directed because the attorneys understand the chess game. They understand how to play behind the scenes, and they're difficult to catch in a lot of instances. They do get caught because that's the way karma comes out, and hopefully all of these crooked attorneys will get caught at some time in the future. But if you look at the way, there's a school board official here got caught. She was trapped because the FBI put together somebody to entice her into the wrongdoing, and she followed that, and she wasn't smart enough. But in the case of Greer, for example, here, Greer was the head of the Republican Party of Florida, and what he was accused of, the scheme that he was accused of, was siphoning cash into a private corporation, and that private corporation was established by Gray Robinson law firm. In other words, Greer and Johnson, the two were working together. And the reason why this all came out was because Johnson blew the whistle on it. But it was established by Gray Robinson, a law firm, and that law firm is now defending the Supreme Court of Florida against a lawsuit by another attorney here in South Florida, Jack Thompson. This is all one big happy family of how they try and work this all around.
Well, Jack Thompson's lawsuit got Greenberg trial in the middle of a $900 million Ponzi.
Yeah.
Not like Proskauer in the hangar in Miami teaching people to lie to the SEC, but actually coordinating the Ponzi.
Right. We're making it work.
They're still representing the Florida bar, in my case in New York.
Right.
And Proskauer still representing themselves in my case.
Right, exactly.
And they're caught in these huge scandals where they're involved in criminal activity, not just representing a criminal, but actually the criminals.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing whether they're insured by Florida Lawyers Mutual.
I'm wondering if any of these people are reporting the liabilities properly, because if they were, they'd be out of business overnight.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be able to hire a new client with any coverage.
Right.
I mean, the fact that Proskauer is being sued for the entire Stanford loss in a global class action lawsuit is beyond comprehension, how they're taking in new people or new clients or,
Well, if there's a complaint filed against an attorney, it's not part of the record, but, if and they don't keep it on file. If you could file 10 complaints and they dismiss.
But these are lawsuits.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying.
How do you hide a lawsuit from your liability carrier?
Yeah, well, that's what they do. They make a deal with the liability carrier. We're going to come to the end of this program, and I'm sorry that it's ending because this is a very interesting discussion with you, Eliot. I really do appreciate your spending time with me this afternoon here on Disbar, the Florida Bar.
Back at you, Les. I greatly appreciate your heroic efforts, and they are heroic, and I am very surprised when I see somebody willing to stand up to the man anymore.
Well, we're doing this, it's a public service. This is a 501c4 organization, which is kind of like a lobbying group in a sense. We do need support, so if you can help us, that would be a benefit, of course, and that would go to support this radio show and continue it on the air. I think it's very important that this continue, that the victimization be known to the people of Florida. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar. My guest has been Eliot Bernstein. Thank you so much for your time today, Eliot. It's very enlightening, your story. And, of course, we wish you the best of luck with your huge lawsuit going forward. If you can get past all of the heroics that they're going to throw at you, you are certainly more powerful than most people have been, and I appreciate your efforts. We'll be with you again, same time, same station tomorrow, folks. Tune in again for Disbar, the Florida Bar, and again, you can catch us streaming live on www.disbarthefloridabar.com. It broadcasts everywhere in the world, and we want this story out. We want this type of corruption to end. It is pervasive. It is all over the country, but especially in Florida, which is the #1 judicial hellhole in the country. We'll be with you again same time tomorrow. My name is Les Winston, and I host Disbar, the Florida Bar, right here on The Biz in South Florida.
In Florida, all other professionals except lawyers are governed by the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Only lawyers regulate themselves through the Florida Bar. This has created a very dangerous good old boys club and a lot of rotten apples.
Sue me.
Tune in each weekday from 2 o'clock to 3 p.m. and listen to stories of individuals who have been affected by the corruption of the Florida Bar. We want you to be aware of the problem that we have with this disciplinary agency. Join us every weekday, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. right here on The Biz.
Really committed mass treason on the country, on other countries. They've done all kinds of They feel that there is no law and that they're above the law. So in that, you're correct. You can start pogroms and putting people in Guantanamo and denying rights. And, you're acting exactly like what we broke away from in England. In fact, I'm wondering why we need a Tea Party if we're not in a monarchy.
Right, exactly. That's exactly where we are. We're in a monarchy, and the elite or the aristocrats that are running everything are pretty much attorneys in the House, the Senate, the executive branch, and in of course the judiciary. And they're stealing property from people all the time. My guest is a very knowledgeable Eliot Bernstein. Eliot has had tremendous experience with the judiciary and the judicial process, and with trying to resolve a theft of his property, and it has exploded and just become a huge and massive lawsuit of a $12 trillion claim. And what's interesting, of course, it is against, who are the defendants in your claim? I imagine that there's a roster that goes from page to
there's
page.
About 10,000 lawyers between the firms.
Right.
40 or so judges.
Right.
The Supreme Court of Florida, the Florida Bar.
Where does the suit like that get heard, Eliot?
Well, I filed to be related to the whistleblower Anderson.
Okay.
And federal judge Shira Schindlin marked it legally related, along with 7 or 8 other cases of abuse in the disciplinary.
Sarah Schindlin is what, a
federal judge at the U.S. District Court, Southern District of New York.
Okay, and this is what is? It sounds to me like she may be a good guy, at least at this point, huh? A good girl.
I say there may be a halo over her head, but we'll see. I've been down the path before with people who are doing the right thing, and when we're hearing that they're threatening witnesses on the way to give deposition in Anderson, who are state employees,
right?
It's getting to a frightening level. As I mentioned, somebody put a bomb in my car. It blew up 3 cars next to me. You can see that on my homepage.
Right.
I was right here in Florida, and I can't even get a press release on it,
right.
Published by the press. Or, right now, we're dealing with, if you look at this, my initial comment to you was the lawyers I'm suing in the state bars got letters of recommendation from the state bars. But at the patent office, they're under federal investigation for fraud on the United States Patent Office, which Special Agent Stephen Lucchese of the West Palm Beach FBI claimed he was going to join Mr. Hiri Motes of the U.S. Patent Office in bringing to the U.S. attorneys the charges of fraud on the United States. I mean, Mr. Motes, the head of the patent bar for the patent office, he's the guy who advised me when he looked at the evidence to file charges of fraud on the United States, not fraud on Eliot or Iviewit, my companies,
right?
But fraud on the United States by these lawyers. Now, that's led to the suspension of my patents in this never-ending suspension, it appears. But obviously, bringing down a corruption ring this large would be a large task, I assume.
Well, it's a huge task. It's the largest task facing us in the country.
So the only people where these guys have gotten any relief is at the state bars. The only way they got that was in conflict. They got caught and all that. That's turned into a big mess. Now there's a whistleblower insider pointing to exactly how this operation works within the state bar, how they're watching the complaints, how Rothstein will probably get elected to the Florida Supreme Court next.
My guest is Eliot Bernstein. Eliot, I want to just take a short commercial break here. This is Disbar the Florida Bar. I am the host, Les Winston. I am with you every day here, every weekday from 2 to 3, right here on The Biz in South Florida. And we are bringing to light stories of victims of the Florida Bar's corruption. In this case, Mr. Bernstein, Eliot Bernstein, had patents that were stolen He is alleging that they were stolen by Proskauer Rose. He filed complaints with the Florida Bar. The Florida Bar basically whitewashed everything that was brought to their attention, claiming that there was law in place that was contrary to or allowing this to happen, which was never really was not part of legislative. It was not finished in the legislature. I think that's correct, right?
They tried to dismiss the complaint based on made-up law that they had just made up a few nights earlier.
And that's a tendency, and that's what we're dealing with here in South Florida and Florida in general.
That was Kenneth Marvin. I don't know if he's still at.
Yeah, Ken Marvin's still there. It's Ken Marvin, John Harkness. It's these players have been there for a long time, and they're basically operating the entire disciplinary process and on a good old boys network. And so Proskauer and Rose is a very large law firm, as the other defendants in your lawsuit, Greenberg Traurig and several other law firms.
Greenberg represents the Florida Bar.
Exactly.
Look at what they filed when I claimed they were conflicted in the federal court as a response. They claim that they're like buddy-buddy with the Florida Bar, the only law firm that handles their, I guess, messy stuff. After Abramoff, I guess they owe them a favor.
Well, the interesting thing, of course, in Abramoff, I was wondering, do you have any comment on the fact that Abramoff got convicted?
Well, my comment is, why didn't the lawyers? And we look back, and who's the lawyer? Right.
There are lawyers behind a lot of these things that are going on.
Now there are lawyers behind Stanford and the deregulation of the banking inside the regulators in Florida. I mean,
that was also Greenberg.
When are you going to put a stop to these criminal law firms that are actually criminal, not criminal law, but criminals running law firms as a front organization? In fact, I make the claim up at my website that most of these Ponzi's, where there's Madoff with $80 billion. Well, there's only been $1 billion found. How many cheeseburgers can a guy eat? Literally. Yeah. Meaning, normally you get a forensic accountant in here, and they find 79 billion more, but they might have been boats, houses, cars, yachts. But there's only so much edible dollars there.
Right.
And so where did all this money go? And what I say is it's all, if you look at the Proskauer involvement with Stanford and Stanford's involvement in money laundering drug cartels from Mexico, which sure sounds like a good law firm to me, you start to see it that the Ponzi schemes are really money laundering operations for the law firms.
Right.
Notice there's lawyers behind all the Ponzi's. Why would lawyers run a Ponzi? They're not. They're money laundering. They're making money disappear, which is all their profits from their stolen real estate frauds, bankruptcy frauds. Now they're in New York taking children frauds, and it's gone nuts.
Well, that's the whole point. Even the way that these things come down is generally directed. The way that the people are able to do this, they're directed because the attorneys understand the chess game. They understand how to play behind the scenes, and they're difficult to catch in a lot of instances. They do get caught because that's the way karma comes out, and hopefully all of these crooked attorneys will get caught at some time in the future. But if you look at the way, there's a school board official here got caught. She was trapped because the FBI put together somebody to entice her into the wrongdoing, and she followed that, and she wasn't smart enough. But in the case of Greer, for example, here, Greer was the head of the Republican Party of Florida, and what he was accused of, the scheme that he was accused of, was siphoning cash into a private corporation. And that private corporation was established by Gray Robinson law firm. In other words, Greer and Johnson, the two were working together. And the reason why this all came out was because Johnson blew the whistle on it. But it was established by Gray Robinson, a law firm. And that law firm is now defending the Supreme Court of Florida against a lawsuit by another attorney here in South Florida, Jack Thompson. This is all one big happy family of how they try and work this all around.
Well, Jack Thompson's lawsuit's got Greenberg Trauer in the middle of a $900 million Ponzi.
Yeah.
Not like Proskauer in the hangar in Miami teaching people to lie to the SEC, but actually coordinating the Ponzi.
Right. We're making it work.
They're still representing the Florida bar, in my case, in New York.
Right.
And Proskauer is still representing themselves, in my case.
Right, exactly.
And they're caught in these huge scandals where they're involved in criminal activity, not just representing a criminal, but actually the criminals.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing whether they're insured by Florida Lawyers Mutual.
I'm wondering if any of these people are reporting the liabilities properly, because if they were, they'd be out of business overnight.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be able to hire a new client with any coverage.
Right.
I mean, the fact that Proskauer is being sued for the entire Stanford loss in a global class action lawsuit is beyond comprehension, how they're taking in new people or new clients or,
Well, if there's a complaint filed against an attorney, it's not part of the record, but, if and they don't keep it on file. If you could file 10 complaints and they dismiss.
But these are lawsuits.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying.
How do you hide a lawsuit from your liability carrier?
Yeah, well, that's what they do. They make a deal with the liability carrier. We're going to come to the end of this program, and I'm sorry that it's ending because this is a very interesting discussion with you, Eliot. I really do appreciate your spending time with me this afternoon here on Disbar, the Florida Bar.
Back at you, Les. I greatly appreciate your heroic efforts, and they are heroic, and I am very surprised when I see somebody willing to stand up to the man anymore.
Well, we're doing this, it's a public service. This is a 501c4 organization, which is kind of like a lobbying group in a sense. We do need support, so if you can help us, that would be a benefit, of course, and that would go to support this radio show and continue it on the air. I think it's very important that this continue, that the victimization be known to the people of Florida. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar. My guest has been Eliot Bernstein. Thank you so much for your time today, Eliot. It's very enlightening, your story. And, of course, we wish you the best of luck with your huge lawsuit going forward. If you can get past all of the heroics that they're going to throw at you, you are certainly more powerful than most people have been, and I appreciate your efforts. We'll be with you again, same time, same station tomorrow, folks. Tune in again for Disbar, the Florida Bar, and again, you can catch us streaming live on www.disbarthefloridabar.com. It broadcasts everywhere in the world, and we want this story out. We want this type of corruption to end. It is pervasive. It is all over the country, but especially in Florida, which is the #1 judicial hellhole in the country. We'll be with you again same time tomorrow. My name is Les Winston, and I host Disbar, the Florida Bar, right here on The Biz in South Florida.
In Florida, all other professionals except lawyers are governed by the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Only lawyers regulate themselves through the Florida Bar. This has created a very dangerous good old boys club and a lot of rotten apples.
Sue me.
Tune in each weekday from 2 o'clock to 3 p.m. and listen to stories of individuals who have been affected by the corruption of the Florida Bar. We want you to be aware of the problem that we have with this disciplinary agency. Join us every weekday, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. right here on The Biz.
Any kind of trial. I was convicted in a bar proceeding in which I was not allowed to put on any evidence.
Right. You were denied.
My referee received campaign contributions after she got my case from the 3 people most keen within the bar, wanting me to be convicted.
Mm-hmm.
So my point to her and to the bar was you could convict Mother Teresa of prostitution in a case like that.
Right, exactly.
Because if you can't defend yourself, folks, then you're going to be convicted.
And this is all, what people don't realize is that there is one central theme here, one central agency that has the control, and that is the Florida Bar, because they have tentacles that go all the way up to the governor's office. He's a member of the Florida Bar. They go to all most of the legislators. They're members of the Florida Bar.
Attorney General Bill McCollum, who's asked citizens to come forward to the statewide grand jury to blow the whistle on corruption, is a member of the Florida Bar.
Right, and this is where the problem is, folks, because they are the octopus. They are all over the place, and they have tremendous power and tremendous control over their situation. We are trying to get somebody in the grand jury system, somebody, particularly William Shepard, who is the chief prosecutor, who was appointed by Bill McCullum. We want him to pay attention to the victims here of the Florida Bar's corruption. We have specific people at the Florida Bar who have performed these illegal acts. We can name the names. We've named them here on the show. We can tell you John Harkness is involved. We can tell you Ken Marvin's involved. We can tell you others, other prosecutors have been involved. There are people who work for the Florida Bar who just don't care what they say. They'll make up things. They'll make up law. I know in your case, Jack, they used a rule against you that wasn't even in existence before.
Right.
That's just an incredible story here, folks.
Yeah, maybe the worst example is this. I go on 60 Minutes to blow the whistle on the Grand Theft Auto video games. I was in Alabama operating as an Alabama attorney because I was admitted to that state for the purpose of bringing this wrongful death action on behalf of these cops. The Alabama State Bar Rule says you're allowed to go to the mass media to blow the whistle on activity like that, especially if public safety is at issue.
Mm-hmm.
That was the rule that I was bound by. The Florida Bar's rules are not that clear. So what did they do? They prosecuted me under Florida Bar rules when the ABA and the Florida Bar itself, in their rules, says that the only rules that applied to me were the Alabama State Bar rules. So they even changed up on me in that regard. So, my individual thing is so egregious, so ridiculous, and there's so much there that, you've been talking about it. What's really important for the listening audience is that if you need a lawyer and you need someone to go to war for you, in effect, in a courtroom, you're less likely to get that representation, that zealous representation, because if your lawyer has to take on certain powers that be that are wired within the bar or within the state government, he will be gone after, he will be prosecuted, and the message is very clear that these are people that you cannot inconvenience, or they will get you.
Yeah, and it's the old story, you can't fight City Hall, and you realize that one of the reasons you can't do that is because the powers that be will do everything they can to stop whoever is representing you, and that's what happens in many cases.
Listen, when they get, I was very useful to them in that when you get someone like Jack Thompson, and it's reported statewide that this guy's been disbarred for taking on the Florida Bar, then everybody gets the message, don't they?
Yes, exactly.
And so it's a very useful. They don't have to get everybody; they just have to get one guy. And in fact, they've gotten dozens.
Yep. And
everybody's watching. Nobody's stupid, and they say, I can't really go as far as I need to because they'll come after me. But unfortunately, somebody has to take them on. Otherwise, they'll just go.
They made it a police state.
They'll define the battle, and they'll define the rules of the battle, and you won't be able to get the zealous representative of your rights that you need. This affects everyone.
It does, and what I mean by that, ladies and gentlemen, what Jack is talking about, my guess is Jack Thompson. Jack and I have had discussions many times on the air here, and the point of this is that they will affect you in many different ways. The importance is that attorneys who represent you need to know that they have to follow the rules, that they're not supposed to be conflicted, that they're not supposed to be doing things that are against your benefit. They're supposed to be working for you. And when you have a corrupted bar situation where the individuals are not going to be disciplined properly by the bar because they are in positions of power, they can get away with these things. And so you have instances where you can lose your property, you can lose your job, you can lose your family, you can lose your inheritance, you can lose anything that you own, all the wealth that you have. It can be taken from you, and the taking can be done in a court setting where you can be totally in the right, have every bit of the law on your side, and still lose. And so that's what we're trying to stop. We want that to stop by virtue of attorneys being concerned and having the knowledge that somebody's going to come after them and make sure that they're doing things right. Believe me, if doctors or other professionals, CPAs, insurance agents, if the other professions operated the way that the bar operates, where you have a good old boys club that allows an insurance agent to steal premiums and nothing gets done, or you have accountants who are taking your property through some extortion of some type, and nothing gets done about it. Believe me, we would be up in arms. Well, it's happening right now in the legal profession, and it needs to stop, and it's because of the Florida bar's corruption. Jack, I want to thank you very much for this afternoon's segment. My guest has been Jack Thompson. Jack has had a really difficult and long-standing battle with the Florida bar, but I hope and I pray that you'll become victorious, that you'll be victorious in what you're doing now. You have the perseverance and the attitude that will help to turn things around. We need more folks like you in the world. We are going to be continuing the programs going on into the future. This is Disbar the Florida Bar. You can hear us streaming live on Disbar the Florida Bar, www.disbarthefloridabar.com. We stream live all around the world. If you want somebody else in another state or another country to listen to the program, they can tune in at 2 o'clock each day. You can also listen to all of the shows that have aired on this program. They are archived on the website. And we also are on Facebook. We would like you to help us with your contributions. It's very important that the show continue and that we air the victimization of individuals by the Florida bar. We hope to get the attention of the grand jury. We have over 15 victims now who have stated unequivocally that they have been victims of the Florida bar's criminal acts and corruption, and we want to bring that to the attention of the grand jury again, and we hope that eventually we will continue, as we continue to knock on that door, it will be open and the investigation will begin. There are specific individuals who we have stated their names, and we continue to talk about them here on the program. We ferreted out of the system. The system needs to be changed. The lawyers need to be disciplined in the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. We'll be right back after a short commercial break. Don't go away. My name is Les Winston, and I host Disbar the Florida Bar right here on the Biz in South Florida.
The United States Trustees Program is the largest organized criminal element in the world.
In Florida, all other professionals except lawyers are governed by the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Only lawyers regulate themselves through the Florida bar.
Because the Florida bar is controlling all three branches of government now. We have attorneys in all three branches. There's a system out of control. There's no more check and balance.
This has created a very dangerous good old boys club and a lot of rotten apples.
Sue me.
Tune in each weekday from 2 o'clock to 3 p.m. and listen to stories of individuals who have been affected by the corruption of the Florida bar. We want you to be aware of the problem that we have with this disciplinary agency. Join us every weekday, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. right here on The Biz. And we're back. This is Disbar the Florida Bar. We're with you every day from 2 to 3 right here on The Biz, the fastest growing radio station in South Florida, 880 a.m. on the dial. And you can also find us streaming live online at www.disbarthefloridabar.com. Once again, this program is intended to bring to light stories of victims of the Florida bar's corruption. And we have with us this afternoon, our guest is Eliot Bernstein. Eliot, I've spoken to you earlier. We've talked on other sessions, and we've talked about your massive problem with the Florida bar and also with the New York judiciary. Maybe you can give us a little thumbnail sketch of what happened to you, so we can bring folks up to date with regard to your involvement with the Florida bar and the attorneys here in South Florida and in New York.
Okay. A quick review is that I invented two technologies. The technologies that are at stake should be understood that they weren't just run-of-the-mill inventions. They changed everything to do with digital imaging and video on the planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from your use of internet video is using technologies I invented. Your watching of television uses technologies that I have invented. Every digital imaging device, from medical devices to telescopes to satellites to every digital camera that you snap a picture and zoom on, use technologies that I've invented.
What's your background, Eliot?
My background is I'm a psychology major from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I sold insurance for since high school till I began working with clients moving rock and roll bands around the world.
What were they moving?
I worked with a company moving rock and roll bands around the world, toured with a bunch of bands. And then I discovered the inventions, which I've always, since a bad car accident, had a appetite for computers, imaging, and video. And I had been working with the technologies, always staying on the cutting edge. And when the internet was born, it was going to be limited to text and banner ad type images because it operates at a very low bandwidth.
Right. So it's hard to get moving images, I guess, huh?
Yeah, and 30 frames a second, full screen, pumped down a little wire is not going to work.
Right.
And so the holy grail search for the internet was the search for how to distribute full screen, full frame rate video. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the inventions. And it uses mathematical scaling formulas I developed, which are, actually come from my psychology background. They are inventions that use the human mind instead of mathematical equations. What happens is, in both instances, images for the video are shrunk down to a very small size and distributed very small, and then blown up on the user's end, saving 75% of the bandwidth of trying to send full screen data.
When you invented this, when you discovered these inventions, or you created these inventions, I guess those are the terms that we would use. I assume that, as all other inventors, you want to protect the invention, so you apply for patents. Is that what you did?
Well, the first step is get an attorney.
Yeah, it's getting legal advice.
Correct. Uh-huh. And getting a patent lawyer.
Right.
And that was my first step.
Okay.
My father and I contracted with Proskauer Rose, who looked at the inventions here in Florida where they were discovered in Boca Raton, and the partners we took it to, Albert Gortz, brought in his other partner at Proskauer, Christopher Wheeler.
How long ago was this, Eliot?
This is 98, 99.
Okay, so in 1998, you discovered this invention. You went to an attorney, the attorneys at Proskauer Rose, and you were working with an attorney there.
And he came back and misrepresented that Proskauer had patent attorneys, which they didn't. They had been mainly a real estate firm prior to my discoveries.
Right.
And he came back after several weeks of, seeing my inventions and telling me he was going to, get to his main office and find the right people. And what he did was he found the right people, but outside of Proskauer, one Rubenstein, head of MPEG LA LLC, the Solus patent attorney for MPEG. He had created a patent pool called MPEG, and the single biggest threat to MPEG was my technologies, meaning if they didn't have them, they'd be out of business.
So just let me reiterate. So you go to an attorney at Proskauer Rose. They tell you that they have patent experience. They don't. And
they bring in Kenneth Rubenstein saying he works for Proskauer when he doesn't, in fact, and that's later discovered by people who were doing due diligence on investing in the company.
Right.
So, I get a call saying, hey, you're telling everybody Kenneth Rubenstein's your patent attorney and that he's at Proskauer, but he really is at a firm called Nelson Goldstein, Wolf, and Schlissel out of Mineola, New York.
Right. And he represents a conflicting interest.
Oh.
Yeah.
absolutely conflicting in the sense that for him to become my patent attorney without a clear China wall established between him and his MPEG pool, he actually created the MPEG pool that's the single biggest infringer and main culprit in the theft of my intellectual properties.
Okay, so
and Rubenstein learned of my technologies under contract with Proskauer, acting as a Proskauer attorney, and in fact he and his partner Raymond Joa, the other soulless patent attorney who put 90 patents in his own name, all to do with my business plan and invention.
Hold on a second, Eliot. Let me go back to that for a second. So the first problem arises when Proskauer doesn't really do patents. Proskauer Rose doesn't really do patents. They bring in somebody and say that he's part of their firm when he's really not. And he starts to get involved in your case, and he represents another entity that really is a conflicted and competitor of yours and is damaged by your invention. And then what happens? You get involved with another attorney who puts patents in his name? Is that what you said?
Yeah, well Rubenstein brought in a guy, Raymond Anthony Joa, and said he was with Proskauer at the time, too. And he was the guy who came out and took invention disclosures. Rubenstein was on conference calls through the invention disclosures. And they were putting on the front that they were with Proskauer. Now, when the investor came and said, whoa, these guys aren't with Proskauer, what's going on? I called Chris Wheeler and said, what's going on? Somebody just told me Ken Rubenstein is with a different law firm.
Right.
And Wheeler came back and said, oh, no, we're acquiring and, blah, and everything's fine. But in the meantime, you're going to have to take another retainer, because I'd already had one with Proskauer, for Meltzer Lippy.
Right, another law firm.
Because Rubenstein will be moving here shortly, which was, I believe, the next day.
Right.
And Rubenstein can't remember any of the details in his deposition, so it's a little harder to find out his transition dates if you read his deposition. But the two of them, Joa stays at Meltzer, so I have to retain now another law firm.
Right.
And Joa starts taking invention disclosures, and we notice that Joa is filing them late. There's missing things. There's missing inventions. Things are cracking, and at that point there were a lot of interested people because a gentleman, Hassan Mia, who was responsible for the Intel CAA multimedia lab,
right.
He came out from California and declared the technologies the Holy Grail.
Right.
And now you had a whole of people and business associates of mine and my family's and other people who came in as investors in the technology, which is probably, it should be noted here that prior to coming to me, Chris Wheeler and the guy he recommended for president of my company, Brian Utley, who was formerly with IBM, who was the general manager of the Boca facility shut down here, and another gentleman who came to my company through Proskauer again, William Dick, who represented Foley and Lardner, patent law firm out of Wisconsin. All three of these characters had just tried to rip off technologies from Monty Friedkin, a Florida philanthropist on the FAU board.
Right.
And then when they wrote when Wheeler from Proskauer gave us Utley's resume to hire him, there was no mention, in fact, of Friedkin's loss, that he had caught them stealing, shut down his business, and fired Utley and all these guys on the spot in huge economic loss.
So they had a history. These attorneys had a history of ripping off inventions.
Yes.
Okay, and now they rip it. Now they're in the process of ripping off your invention.
And so Wheeler comes in, misrepresents. So the crew has got to get in around me and do the same. Now at Friedkin's, which was Diamond Turf Equipment Company out in, I think somewhere in Fort Lauderdale or so, when they came into my company, Wheeler brought in Utley, but he brought in a falsified resume that said that Diamond Turf went on to be the leading lawnmower due to Utley, but that wasn't true. The truth was Utley was fired on the spot because Friedkin caught on that they were stealing intellectual properties from his company.
Is Friedkin still alive?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Not Friedkin here in Florida.
Do you have any contact with him?
He was on the SAU board. I don't. I don't. I called him one day, and he exposed that Utley had lied on his resume. He gave me the full scoop, and I believe he talked to some lawyer friends of mine, and that was it. And, we didn't really need much more from Monty, other than a thank you for exposing the truth. And I didn't call Monty till after we had really discovered the whole of what was going on at Iviewit with these same three people who schemed Friedkin, which is Wheeler from Proskauer, Bill Dick from Foley, and Brian Utley from IBM. They brought in some other IBM old crony guys, and some of this might, I've inferred that IBM's become the most inventive company on the planet Earth, and it might very well be that there's a crew of people. In fact, Bill Dick handled the Far Eastern patent pool for IBM.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't know if there's this ring, how deep it goes of patent thieves, but I can tell you they brought in MPEG right quick. Proskauer then brought Rubenstein into Proskauer, and they formed, right around my technologies, an intellectual property department.
So what they did was they captured your intellectual property by virtue of creating a quasi-legal kind of a cabal around your patents.
Well, think about this. Patent pool, so it's not just a cabal. Rubenstein had a patent pool. Proskauer acquired Rubenstein from Meltzer, so they acquired control of the MPEG patent pool. And then they went to push me out of the market and destroy my companies and my life in the hopes that
What is a patent pool? What is a patent pool exactly, Eliot? What is it?
Patent pool is where you try to control a standard. Singer Sewing tried it. RCA tried it. The Justice Department busted them up.
Right.
Because usually what a patent pool is a mechanism for lawyers to make off with inventor money.
Okay.
And try to control the standards and create an anti-competitive market. Because, look, if you take your invention to Rubenstein and he loves it,
right.
There's a few plays he can make on you to steal it from you. He can become your attorney, like he did with me.
Right.
And steal your patents that way and try to push you out of the market quietly while they're stealing them before they get caught. Now, I don't know how many people have caught them. But, in my case, the idea was that Rubenstein would get the inventions, put them into the MPEG patent pool, and then they'd block me from market while they roll them out and try to kill me. And basically they put a bomb in my car and tried to murder me.
So if they murder you, the trail, the way, you're the only one that really has the complete knowledge of it and the intention to go after them to recover your property.
Absolutely not. To get this far over 10 years, I had to sell a lot of people on the future of the technologies being ours, and from military people down the line that I had to make deals with.
Right.
It wasn't just me.
Right.
There were a lot of people who came into this and put in money. So Proskauer is ripping off all those people.
Okay.
And then from there, once we discovered what was going on publicly, made it public what was going on, a lot of people had to be brought in because it was effectively seen that, there was a possibility of an actual treasonous group at the patent office. We had no idea that it would extend to, a treasonous group against the entire country.
But you're basically working with Florida attorneys, and when we come, we'll just take a short break, and when we come back from that break, I want to talk about what you did with regard to the Florida attorneys to try to remedy your situation. My guest this afternoon is Eliot Bernstein. Eliot has had a huge legal battle going on with the lawyers, and with the bars in Florida and New York, and we'll be back with him in a moment. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar. I'm your host, Les Winston. I'm with you every weekday from 2 to 3 p.m. right here on The Biz in South Florida. South Florida's fastest growing station. We are talking with victims of the Florida Bar's corruption. We've been listening to Eliot's story of how he got involved with attorneys with his patent inventions. And when we come back from the short commercial break, we're going to continue with Eliot's story. I want to remind you that we do stream live on the web at www.disbarthefloridabar.com. We are a 501c4 organization called Disbar, the Florida Bar Incorporated, and we survive on contributions made by supporters, and we certainly ask for your help if you are interested in seeing change occur, getting the Florida Bar out of the regulatory business with attorneys, cleaning up the good old boys network and eliminating the rotten apples in the legal profession, the rogue attorneys who are taking advantage of citizens of Florida. There are rogue attorneys all over the country, but we're concentrating on the Florida Bar and the Florida Bar's relationship with attorneys, where they've created a good old boys club and lots of rotten apples. We need to change that. The lawyers need to be regulated in a different fashion, and it will stop their thinking that they can get away with whatever it is they want to get away with, as they have in the past. We'll be right back after this short commercial break. Don't go away. We'll be back with Eliot Bernstein. My name is Les Winston, and I host Disbar, the Florida Bar, right here on The Biz in South Florida.
The United States Trustees Program is the largest organized criminal element in the world.
In Florida, all other professionals except lawyers are governed by the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Only lawyers regulate themselves through the Florida Bar.
Because the Florida Bar is controlling all three branches of government now. We have attorneys in all three branches. There's a system out of control. There's no more check and balance.
This has created a very dangerous good old boys club and a lot of rotten apples.
Sue me.
Tune in each weekday from 2 o'clock to 3 p.m. and listen to stories of individuals who have been affected by the corruption of the Florida Bar. We want you to be aware of the problem that we have with this disciplinary agency. Join us every weekday, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. right here on The Biz. And we're back. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar. I'm your host, Les Winston. My guest this afternoon is Eliot Bernstein. Eliot, you were talking about the process that you went through. I mean, you've had a very interesting and varied career, and you came upon these inventions. You created these inventions that were major inventions of really, I guess, being able to view video on a computer screen. I guess that's what the nut of it is. Is that a proper definition?
That's how it was discovered, but when you turn on your television, the fact that you have 200 channels instead of 40 is also attributable to the invention.
Okay, so it's really an extension of what you can put on the television networks as a result of the use of cable and so on. But that invention, when you realized what you had, you hired a patent attorney. You thought at the firm of Proskauer and Rose. You found out later that they weren't patent attorneys, that they hired other parties to handle the patent work who were not members of Proskauer Rose. They ended up interfering or surrounding your patent with what is called a patent pool. And that is a technique that they use to control the patent, I guess, and to capture the revenue from the patent in many different ways. When you discovered that this was going on with your invention and your patents, and you may have gotten that sickening feeling in the pit of your stomach, the hair on the back of your neck rose, and you couldn't figure out how to get rid of this, did you go to the Florida Bar with the problem?
Well, I did, but first, and it's an interesting trail to the bar. Mm-hmm. The first thing was, we ascertained where the attorneys really were for, and that raised brows of people that they weren't actually with Proskauer.
Right.
But we got over that, and Wheeler was now promising that MPEG would pay us a royalty and licensing once Rubenstein determined if they were valid patents, and they hadn't been seen by any black box, engineers. So they took us over to a client, Chris Wheeler's Real 3D, which was Intel, Silicon Graphics, and Lockheed Martin. Lockheed being the 70% owner of the company, Intel 10% SGI. And they brought in their engineers from around the world, and mysteriously Rubenstein and Joa were supposed to be at the disclosure meeting, and they both fell off the planet Earth that day, even though they were scheduled, and didn't attend the meeting. But we forced disclosures on all of the Real 3D people before we would tell them how we were doing it. And we ended up signing a license with them as well. But what happened was the engineers came in from the three companies, and it might have been about 20 of them. And they knew every technology in imaging and video in the world because Lockheed's the biggest purveyor of imaging and video technology in the world. Real 3D dating back to the original lunar launches, and controlling a patent pool that pretty much monopolized the 3D technologies to that point in history.
Okay.
So if anybody was going to know if my stuff existed, it was these guys. They came in, they couldn't figure it out.
Right.
When asked by the chairman of the company, Gerald Stanley, who was Wheeler's good buddy, what the value of the technologies was, the chief engineer, Rosalie Labona of Real 3D, said they were priceless.
Right.
Billions, hundreds of, and I mean, numbers that, I'm suing for 12 trillion.
Right.
12 pounds to the trillion each.
Right. Right.
But, I don't know what the value of electricity was over time. These are that powerful of inventions. So what happened was, once we got the confirmation and we had the Mia calling it the Holy Grail, and he was the guy who made the Internet for the public from the CIA's creation of the Internet, he took it out to the public. And now with all these blessings, it was very difficult for Proskauer now because actually a lot of people had invested, meaning we were starting, Wayne Huizenga, the Florida billionaire, the Miami Dolphins, Waste Management, Blockbuster Video. He was the seed money in the company. Then there was a Crossbow Ventures out of West Palm Beach who put in millions of dollars. And then most significant is the Crossbow's money was 2/3 SBIC, SBA loans. Right. And so one of the largest owners of my technology that they're ripping off is actually the U.S. government. And I've petitioned the SBA, and they have an ongoing investigation of these attorneys at the Inspector General's office.
Okay.
That's been going on for several years.
So how did you get to the bar? Let's go back to the Florida bar. What was the process?
Okay, so we caught Joa next with the switching patents and putting patents in his name, and there were rumors, and somebody told us that he might be patenting in his name. And, it was almost unbelievable. Like you said, it gets you sick to the stomach.
How do you spell that name that you're saying?
Raymond Joa, Joao.
Joao, Joao. Okay.
The most inventor since Edison, but only after learning of my technologies under disclosure.
Okay.
He patented 90 patents. And probably what the intent was to put them in the patent pool because patent pools are divided up according to number of patents. So Rubenstein probably had Joa just write any patent that related to my stuff so that they could get 90, patents in there and split the pool up to more Proskauer. And so, that might be how they're moving the money around.
How are you damaged as a result of that?
Well, Joa failed to patent our inventions properly. People have reviewed it and said he, on the one hand was showing us one invention and that we signed and then replacing the signature pages and filing nonsense while going out and filing for himself and, Proskauer, who employed him to work with us, that, put him into his own name. So it hurt us dramatically. In fact, we had licenses with Warner Brothers and Intel through Real 3D, and all was going well. But when Warner Brothers found out about some of these patent issues, that license stopped overnight, so we could clear up these issues, and it's been going on since 2001. First we caught Joa.
Yeah. So this is all something you owned these, and now Joa has interfered, and he now shows that he's owning them, so he's interfering with your ability to contract with anybody.
And he's been contracting some of them and licensing them and selling them to public companies and all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
And
he's a Florida attorney?
Rubenstein put it onto every MPEG compliant product in the world that streams video. So you're talking back-end encoders, video cameras, software for cameras, televisions, software for televisions, you name it, the chips. Well, the reason Intel bought Real 3D 100% was because Intel put the technology right onto their chip.
Okay, so now you got Joe, who is a Florida attorney.
Yeah, he's from Yonkers.
Oh, he's from Yonkers, New York.
Correct.
Okay, so
Rubenstein's from New York.
Rubenstein is from New York. He's from Mineola.
He was working at Nelson in Mineola with Joe. So originally, him and Joe. Well, actually, if you look at their depositions, it's so confusing. I don't know how they came together yet.
So those are two attorneys from New York. They got involved by Proskauer Rose or by,
both of those guys got involved by Proskauer, representing them initially as Proskauer Patent Counsel.
Right. Okay. So now
we bust Joe. So we go to Wheeler and say, oh, my God, there's rumors of buzz of Joe stealing and making bad patent filings, and you got to investigate this. This is your guy.
Right.
So he comes in after a few days and he says, oh, my God, Eliot, I can't believe I didn't think of this originally. But me and Brian Utley, who's your president, have a friend who Brian used to work with, one Mr. William Dick, and we know him. He's a good guy. They forgot to tell me that they ripped off Friedkin together.
Right.
And he'll replace Joe, and you get Foley and Lardner, one of the biggest patent firms in the world. Now, and I knew Foley. I had gone to school in Madison, Wisconsin, so, I knew of them.
Right.
And I knew of them from my insurance dealings.
Right.
And I had, no idea who Michael Greby was and what he is. But he became, with Mr. Dick, part of the cabal of corrupted attorneys to now try to cover up the Joe. So Foley comes in with Dick, Mr. Fari's patent pooling guru from Foley, and Dick's going to correct all the Joe problems, and he's going to assign the patents properly to the right places that Joe didn't do.
Right.
Going to put on all the inventors who were supposed to be on originally that they left off because
he's going to straighten out all the errors that Joe made and bring you back whole.
In fact, Foley comes back and their first report is horrible for Joe. It says, he's missing files, the files are empty.
Right.
And so, it's this whole thing. Dick gets in close to me through his two guys, Bohm and Becker, two more attorneys they bring in to, get my invention straightened out. Joe had filed provisionals and one actual provisional to patent pending. And then Foley came in and they were going to file the rest of the provisionals as they became due. And lo and behold, as we're going to patent the idea, Brian Utley asked me to sign blank patent documents, of which I said no. And he said, well, they have to be in tonight, so you got to sign them. And I don't have the patents here for you to review them. They're too big, and you wouldn't be able to review them in that much time. And I happened to notice the patent volumes on his desk. So with a friend of mine, Jim Armstrong, who was working at the company and a shareholder and a founder and inventor, what happened next was I grabbed the books, and my friend watched over Mr. Utley as I copied them. And when we went to review the patents, we found that Mr. Utley suddenly was now an inventor, even though he wasn't there at the time of invention.
Okay.
On certain patents, like zoom and pan on a digital camera, invented soullessly by Brian Utley.
Okay.
And Foley and Lardner did the old work on that.
Okay.
And what's interesting is under review from Wachovia Securities for a private placement, nobody mentioned any of these patents.
Okay.
And Foley was questioned by them as to the assignments of all of the patents. Well, later we find out from Harry Motes, the Director of Office of Enrollment and Discipline for the Federal Patent Bar Attorneys, that everything that was on the Foley and Lardner docket was false.
Okay, so
in fact, I'm forced to seek an act of Congress, which I am from Dianne Feinstein, to change the patent law to allow me to amend patents which I'm neither the inventor, owner, or assignee of, although they're listed in business plan after business plan and the Wachovia private placement memorandum as patents owned by my group.
okay, Eliot,
And
we're coming.
Elliot, patent information unless you're an owner, inventor, or blah. So we're seeking Feinstein's aid to amend the patent law where your attorneys have stolen your patents to be able to get the information to change those patents.
Okay, Eliot, we're coming up to the end of the show for this segment, and I want to introduce this segment in the next show because we need to bring in the Florida Bar to this conversation. And at this point, we've got a whole bunch of attorneys from different parts of the country who have been involved in this, and obviously what you've invented is a really important invention, and you are trying to reestablish your rights to it and the money that you're entitled to. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar. I'm your host, Les Winston. We're with you every weekday here from 2 to 3 on the Biz, fastest growing station in South Florida. We're talking about the Florida Bar and the problem that folks have with corruption at the Florida Bar because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, denying honest services and in many cases obstructing justice. We're going to continue our discussion with Eliot Bernstein on our next show, so tune in tomorrow for the continuation of the Eliot Bernstein story. We will be, again, broadcasting at 2 o'clock, 2 to 3 p.m. right here on The Biz. Tune in then.
We are building a case, and it takes time. You know that.
Hello and welcome to today's edition of Disbar, the Florida Bar. I'm your host, Les Winston. I'm with every weekday from 2 to 3 right here on The Biz, fastest growing radio station in South Florida. And we are talking with victims of the Florida Bar's corruption. My guest this afternoon is Eliot Bernstein. We're continuing the story of Eliot Bernstein. We started it on a previous show, and I want to carry on with Eliot to point out to the listening audience just how serious and how important it is for us to correct the inability of the Florida Bar to do what they're supposed to be doing to protect us from rogue attorneys. In the Eliot Bernstein case, he started out with a law firm here in South Florida, having invented a very, very powerful, very significant invention. It's been considered to be the equivalent of electricity to bring it to some sort of analogy that you can relate to. That's a very important invention worth a lot of money. And when he took it to Proskauer Rose for work of a patent attorney, they told him that they were skilled in patent work, and but that wasn't to be the case. In fact, what they did was they brought in other attorneys from other firms to do the work, and as a result of being kind of brought in, bringing in attorneys from different places with different experiences, and they having the ability to recognize exactly what was involved here and the values, it became almost a plot. In fact, I believe that Eliot would tell you it is a plot that they hatched in order to create a patent pool around this patent to actually steal the values of the patent and use them for their own benefit in deference to the inventor. And so we were at a point in the story where we were discussing, Eliot was relating the fact that these patents, that the patent that he had invented was now being controlled in part by other attorneys who were brought in from New York. And a gentleman by the name of Utley was involved who used to be with IBM. Is that correct, Eliot?
Correct.
Yeah, and so we were at a point where you realize now what's happening is that your invention, through the devious methods of these attorneys and the attorneys that they combined with are making your patent their own. They're using your patent to create other patents in their own names, recognizing the extreme value of what you had invented. And you were involved with the Proskauer Rose law firm here in Florida and several attorneys in New York. And you were at a stage now where you were losing contracts because when you had contracts written with Warner Brothers, for example, Warner Brothers discovered that there were issues with regard to the patent ownership, or I guess the control of the patents, and they then backed out of contracts. So there was there is significant financial harm being brought to you as a result of the the contrivances of these attorneys. Take me to the next step with regard to what you then do to try to protect yourself or to remedy the situation. What did you do?
Well, where we left off was that I should preface your comments there with the fact that they brought in other attorneys, Proskauer did, when I brought them in the inventions, but they brought them in under they misled us as to who they were. They told us they were Proskauer partners when in fact they weren't.
So they basically lied to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not false pretenses; it's a lie. They said that they're members of their firm, and in fact, they weren't.
They made representations to investors in the company of that.
So people that were investing in your company were relying on the fact that Proskauer was telling the truth.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And they were surprised when they found that Rubenstein and Joa were with Meltzer Libby out in Mineola.
Right.
And then because they were caught right there, they had to, tell us that Rubenstein was coming to Proskauer, and they were, had bought out because they wanted to get into internet. And
so they were laying the groundwork to try and make it appear as if they were becoming part of Proskauer if they weren't already.
Well, I think what they did was they went out and picked the guy who could most steal the technologies for them, and then planned on bringing Rubenstein to Proskauer to control the technologies through Proskauer, which they are now through MPEG.
Okay.
Rubenstein wasn't with Proskauer. He was working on the MPEG patent pool, which was a very small pool of patents that he was trying to create the standard for digital video. And so Proskauer saw that Rubenstein was probably the most harmed by my technology, so they went to him to patent it for themselves.
Okay.
Not for Eliot, Bernstein, and the investors and Iviewit.
Okay, they did it. They were doing it for another party.
They were for themselves.
For themselves, I'm saying.
Meaning, right now, today, Proskauer Rose, if you go up to their website, lists MPEG as one of their clients.
Okay.
And that Ken Rubenstein controls MPEG and was the guy who founded MPEG and is the sole patent evaluator, basically gave Proskauer the control of rolling out my technologies on a major basis. Now, this involves, public companies, Google, Yahoo,
right.
That we're going to take off. And there might even be evidence that they actually manipulated the Internet stock bubble, knowing that my technologies would revolutionize the Internet, and they drove out of business a lot of companies that were ground floor in the Internet through the bubble, gobbled up those companies that they knew would benefit from my technologies, like storage devices, whatever, encoding companies, video distribution, and then once they could buy the companies on the cheap or force everybody out of business and come out and emerge with their partners. So you have to understand these technologies now, they made new markets. For example, you wouldn't be able to do the iPhone video application. That's, the hot new thing on the iPhone without my technologies. Okay. That's a brand new market that wouldn't even exist without it. And so all of those markets, I think what Proskauer did was knew that Rubenstein could roll it out into the standards. They would then control the standard, and all they had to do was rub out their client, the inventor.
Right, which is what they tried to do.
Well, through car bombing in the end.
Right.
And so, yeah, and everything else. They economically deprived me. They blocked me from due process wherever I went.
Yeah.
And that'll get into that part of the story. We picked up at the last show we caught Joa patenting. We went to Proskauer.
Right.
We said, this is the guy you brought in. What's going on? Is he putting inventions in his own name, my patent attorney? This is unbelievable. And people thought we were crazy even saying it.
Who thought you were crazy?
Everybody, investors, whoever we took it to that was involved in this, thought, what are you talking about? Your patent attorney's putting patents in his name? It's hard to believe.
Right.
It's probably hard for you to believe, and you're not an investor.
No, it's very hard to believe because you can't even imagine that they would consider doing something like that because it would seem so ridiculous for them to do that.
Well, you remember this. The patent office is bigger than the banks.
Right.
It's the biggest jewel of the country. So if you were planning a coup or siege on the country, you would go after the jewel.
Right.
And the jewel is the patent office, and now you can see they've got an IBM guy that Obama just put in, Capos, running the place, who's trying to make it first to invent, which would, kill all inventors as their attorneys run to the patent office first, like Joe with your invention. And forget to file yours timely, and
So
when your attorney becomes your adversary.
Yeah, this is a huge, Eliot. I mean, I think the listening audience needs to understand that there's a reason why you are the hello.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, there's a reason why you are a plaintiff in a $12 trillion lawsuit against a myriad of defendants, including all of these attorneys. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that lawsuit's tied to a whistleblower lawsuit of a Supreme Court of New York employee, staff attorney.
So what you've done is because in order to, what happens when you have a huge potential victory or huge potential claim against anybody that has clout, they mobilize every single resource that's available to them in the judiciary to protect what they've done. And this is a pattern that is probably going on around the country in hundreds or if not thousands of situations where there are large claims or where individuals have assets or where there are attorneys who are trying to get their hands on or around the values. These are rogue attorneys. Now, we're not talking about all attorneys. We're talking about the ones that specialize in this kind of behavior. And those rogue attorneys are not controllable because the entities that are supposed to control them, as we've learned from what you just talked about, this whistleblower, they have a systematic way of diffusing complaints against these attorneys or against judges who do things that are outside the scope of what is legal. And just correct me if I'm not paraphrasing all of this in a kind of in a correct way. This lady Anderson, who worked for the Justice Department in New York, in the state of New York? No?
New York Supreme Court.
In the New York Supreme Court. What was she in this New York Supreme Court?
She worked for the First Department Departmental Disciplinary Committee.
She worked for the First Departmental Disciplinary Committee,
which is an aegis of the New York Supreme Court Appellate Division, First Department.
In other words, this is the entity that takes in the complaints against attorneys. Is that correct?
Yeah, including all those at the Wall Street District.
Including all those in the Wall Street District. So she's the one that is in an agency, a governmental entity that takes in complaints against attorneys, and she has blown the whistle on the process by disclosing that in that agency there was somebody who would be a gatekeeper or a cleaner, as she referred to them, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
That would clean the complaints against the attorneys or anybody, or I guess even U.S. attorneys were if somebody complained against a U.S. attorney or they complained against any attorneys, this cleaner would sanitize, I guess.
Not any attorney, just ones from what she said in open U.S. federal court were, quote, favored lawyers and law firms.
Okay, so
this is the Judiciary Committee.
Yeah, so this goes back to the good old boys club, the ones that are in the good old boys club, the ones that are anointed, the ones that are the favored attorneys, the ones that are from the big law firms, perhaps, or the ones that who are paying judges or are supporting judges' campaigns or whatever it is. They become favored attorneys, and when the complaints come in against those favored attorneys, the sanitizer would sanitize the claims before they would get to Mrs. Anderson's department.
Well, not only that, but if Mrs. Anderson's department had started investigating, we learned in court, they would try to force the investigator to change their complaints, or they would just actually go in, throw the investigator's report out, and put their own report in replacing the complaint, which is just unbelievable.
Right.
And then if the investigator, like Anderson, was complaining of that process, they worked to rub you out of your job. And in her case, they physically assaulted her.
Mm-hmm.
Her supervisor was sent to management counseling. But we're in the ethics department of New York talking about this,
right?
Which is just so mind-blowing.
Right. Well, it's not mind-blowing because, again, it goes back to the very theme or this
total desecration of the word law, and everything's sacred about it.
Right, and it's also a desecration of our constitutional rights, a desecration.
At the highest office, at the fail-safe.
Right.
These are supposed to be the fail-safes.
Right.
And they're actually committing the crimes.
Right. This is organized crime at its highest level, and it's impossible to almost get your arms around because of the magnitude of the power and the ability for them to protect what they're doing.
Well, for example, when you said, these powerful law firms, first of all, they're not rogue lawyers and law firms. They're a coordinated RICO enterprise controlled of, several large law firms. Well, one of them that I'm, brought in with this Bill Dick from Foley and Lardner, who came in to cover up the JOA crimes and continued and perpetuated patent frauds. The key guy at Foley and Lardner was Michael Grebbe, who's the former RNC chief counsel, and you can see what a wonderful job he did.
That's
to
the Republican National Committee? Is that who that is?
Yes, the Republican National Committee. So one of the most powerful men in the country,
right,
with one of the key jobs of that party, the Republican Party.
Right.
And you can see that with Grebbe's control of the party, it went to hell in a bucket, is the only way you could describe it.
Yeah.
He is the cause of all that. And when Grebbe knew that he and his firm were under investigation and that we had busted them, you can imagine that he called every dirty guy on the Republican National Committee's former list of Nixon cronies, and all of a sudden our country became infected with people like, Rumsfeld and, outright losers from the past, to be quite frank. Cheney was probably the biggest losing politician ever, meaning everything he touched went awry. And so all of a sudden, Grebbe, to seize control, and this is where he knew he would lose $1 billion, his fortune. They were busted. They were under investigation. Their name was, the Foley and Lardner name was on a patent in Brian Utley's name for one of my inventions without any other inventors. I mean, they were dead. They were caught. The evidence was out. I circulated it.
So what did they do to protect themselves?
Well, I say that Grebbe, who's a former West Point cadet, threw a coup on the United States and through election manipulation and fraud, pulled a coup on the country. He rigged elections. He was already in the process, I believe, through the Federalist Society, which is the group of guys trying to destroy the federal court system, and are close to doing it, by the way. And so he was a big, guy in this cabal already of corrupt attorneys. So here was the chance and the need to overthrow the country. Well, look what they did. They got in. They, if I'm correct, they threw the presidential election with Judge Jorge Labarga, who got elected to the Supreme Court, funny enough, while he's in a lawsuit with me. I wonder if he disclosed that when he was going for a Supreme Court nomination, that he was in a $12 trillion lawsuit federally. And I wonder if, the great, people of Florida know all about this history, and he's, I'm sure reported it to, all liability carriers, et cetera. But what Labarga did was he threw the election. He usurped the people's recount and threw it up to the Supreme Court goons who were already in place blocking me. So there were already a bunch of bad guys there.
This is in Florida now you're talking about.
Yeah, this is the Florida Bush v. Gore election.
Yeah, and so...
It orchestrated by lawyers like Proskauer and Foley, who knew that they were about to go to prison for the next 30 years if they were busted fraudulently filing patents,
So do you think, let me ask you a question, do you think if Gore was elected, it would have changed things?
No, because they were going to get to whoever it was. And Proskauer has a Democratic influence, whereas Foley had the Republican influence, so they would have got to him either way.
It's really what we're talking about here is the influence of lawyers and law firms on this country.
Oh, the takeover of this country.
Yeah, and
by
that,
law
and
firms.
that. I mean, I don't want to politicize it. What I want to do is I want to uncover the fact that there are, that there's organized lawyers. It's
on both sides, Republican and Democratic.
Exactly, and they'll do whatever they have to do to protect themselves, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. They're protecting themselves as lawyers, and they're invested in all of the other branches of government, so there's no recourse against them because there's no separation of powers. My guest this afternoon is Eliot Bernstein, and we are discussing a really interesting case, a huge case in the terms of litigation today in the United States. It's probably the largest case right now that has been brought in the courts from a standpoint of damages at $12 trillion. There's nothing that I've ever heard that's larger than that. And the main proponent of that, the main individual is Eliot Bernstein, whose inventions were stolen from him by attorneys and by a series of protectionist and organized arrangements against him. We'll be right back with Eliot Bernstein. Don't go away. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar. I'm your host, Les Winston. I'm with you every day from 2 to 3 p.m. right here on The Biz, the fastest growing radio station in South Florida. And we are discussing with victims of the Florida Bar's corruption. We are talking about this so that the folks get a handle on what it is that's going on. This is not just a local issue. It's not an issue here in South Florida. It's an issue around all of Florida. It's an issue around a lot of the United States. It's very important that we understand that we have lost a tremendous, control in our system of checks and balances by virtue of the lawyers being involved in all of the branches of government. And, it's not the good lawyers we're talking about. It's the ones that are corrupted, the ones that are part of the good old boys club who are basically running the country. We'll be right back with Eliot Bernstein. Don't go away. My name is Les Winston, and I host Disbar, the Florida Bar, right here on The Biz in South Florida.
The United States Trustees Program is the largest organized criminal element in the world.
In Florida, all other professionals except lawyers are governed by the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Only lawyers regulate themselves through the Florida Bar.
Because the Florida Bar is controlling all three branches of government now. We have attorneys in all three branches. There's a systematic control. There's no more check and balance.
This has created a very dangerous good old boys club and a lot of rotten apples.
Sue me.
Tune in each weekday from 2 o'clock to 3 p.m. and listen to stories of individuals who have been affected by the corruption of the Florida Bar. We want you to be aware of the problem that we have with this disciplinary agency. Join us every weekday, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. right here on The Biz. And we're back. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar. I'm your host, Les Winston. My guest this afternoon is Eliot Bernstein. Eliot, before we took our break, we were talking about the fact that we've lost control of the country in a sense to the attorneys, and when there's money at stake, big money at stake, they will do anything and everything they have to do to protect themselves, especially when they get caught, and that's what we were talking about before. But now I want to go back and I want to focus a little bit more on the Florida Bar's role in this, because though compared to the New York Bar and compared to what has been uncovered by this lady, the whistleblower Anderson, who was working in the New York system of discipline, who blew the whistle on this on another party that was actually the sanitizer or the cleaner for complaints against those in favor. We now talk about the Florida Bar and the Florida Bar's corruption here in Florida, in the sense that they do the same thing, that the Florida Bar has a systematic way of dealing with complaints against attorneys who are in favor, and they basically prevent any harm from coming to those individuals. And I want to relate your experience. What did you do with the Florida Bar about your situation?
Well, it's interesting that you say that they act like the New York Bar, because in my case, they actually acted together.
in conjunction with the New York bar.
And it's a fascinating story.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, Grebe from Foley and Proskauer now have evidence all over the place that they committed this crime.
And the evidence is clear. There's no question in your mind that if you presented your evidence to a jury of 12 uninterested individuals, they would come back and they would say, there's no question of a doubt that this is what happened.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I presented it to federal investigators like the Federal Patent Bar, which oversights federal patent attorneys.
Right.
And they're investigating.
Okay.
And I've presented it to the FBI. They've seemed to lost my file after the investigator said he was going to the patent office to work with Mr. Motes, who's the director of the patent office, OED.
Which FBI office is that?
That would be the West Palm Beach under Stephen Lou Casey was the special agent in charge.
Okay.
He's gone missing. They actually asked me if I knew where he was,
okay.
which I did.
Okay.
Because he had said he was leaving to work with Motes regarding the attorney crimes that were frauds upon the United States, not just fraud against Eliot. These guys had submitted false oaths of application as registered federal patent agents, and these are serious Title 18 crimes, very serious. So,
well, what you said before, I just want to reiterate what you said before, which is really important, that the most valuable thing that we have in this country are our patents.
Oh, absolutely. They're bigger. You can have an invention that's worth a fortune, and if your patent attorney's got the ability to steal it from you, there's a few things that'll happen. A, inventors will stop inventing.
Right.
Because the king owns your invention, and normally when the king wants to claim your invention, he cuts your head off and claims it as his own.
Right.
So nobody wants to be the next great inventor.
Right. So where we have this system of exploiting or using the entrepreneurial skills and the inventive minds of Americans, what's going on behind the scenes are the contraction and dismantling of our abilities to protect ourselves in the patents of our inventors.
Correct. And where the attorneys are the ones stealing the inventions, the only thing an attorney has ever invented is a way to steal a patent.
Okay.
They're not a normally very inventive club. So this is about...
Well, they're inventive with regard to protecting themselves and working around the chessboard where their king is going to be
steal a patent.
Yeah, exactly.
So you got to cover your butt.
Your assets.
When you get caught, so you got to have people inside the patent office. You got to have a whole thing. I think these law firms have been running way back schemes of taking, estates, and the more and more they got away with these schemes, the riskier they became. The more they got, they realized their power if they misused it.
Right.
The more criminal organizations realized that if they could control law firms, they control the country.
Right.
And so how did Florida and New York work together is an interesting story.
Okay.
After the election fraud that La Barga and West Palm helped orchestrate, I ended up in court with Jorge La Barga.
Okay.
And strangely enough, Warner Brothers discovered during their due diligence to do we were already licensed. I was working inside their advanced technology labs. My office was in their building in California. I had an office here in Boca. And they came back and said, oh, my God, the patents that Brian Utley showed us aren't the patents that are on file with the U.S. Patent Office. You need to check that out. And you're in a lawsuit with your lawyers in a bankruptcy with Brian Utley et al. And I said, what? Nobody's in a bankruptcy. Nobody's in a lawsuit with it. Look, here's a brand-new Wachovia private placement Proskauer put together. They don't say anything about suits and bankruptcies. And, what do you... So I called a friend of mine who was a lawyer, and she looked it up, and lo and behold, Iviewit was actually being sued by Proskauer, and they were in a bankruptcy with Utley and some other IBM people, and they're people from Real 3D. And this is part of the scam that we learned about when Motes from the Patent Office said that all of Foley and Lardner's assignments were wrong. Well, what it appears has happened, if you notice from my emails to you, I have like 20 companies, some identically named, where part of the scam that they ran on Friedkin was Wheeler was brought in by Utley, who was running Friedkin's company, to patent the Friedkin inventions at Diamond Turf into companies owned by Utley, and at his home address. And Dick was writing the patents and filing them on behalf of Utley and his company. And so this is the kind of scam where they set up these companies that look and smell like yours.
Right.
And they put in the real patents into those companies, saving the filing dates for themselves and everything, because you need that.
Right.
And then I believe basically the scheme they were planning was they had moved technologies into these dummy corporations they had set up. I was in a lawsuit with Proskauer where we had counsel, the company, and we didn't even know about the counsel, and we never retained them, and it was bizarre. It was like surreal at the time.
I mean, it was litigation that you didn't know about.
Right, that wasn't disclosed in a Wachovia private placement, a bankruptcy, assets transferring in the background, perhaps
so now
the technologies that were transferring to Enron.
Yeah, so Warner Brother brings this to your attention. You investigate and you find out that this is going on.
I go into a courtroom. First of all, we fire everybody.
Fire? What do you mean everybody?
We fire everybody. We fire Utley. We fire the whole company goes down, and we shut down Boca overnight. The minute we catch on to some of this in 2001, and we get rid of them all.
Okay.
And we go to look at what these cases are. So
when you say we, who's the we?
We just the investors and interested parties and people who are
the people who were in your organized entity.
Right. I had like several hundred NDAs with Fortune 500 companies.
Right.
I was already in license contracts with several Fortune 500 companies.
What's NDA?
A non-disclosure agreement.
Okay. So you have a non-disclosure agreement with a lot of entities. They're all working on the basis that you have the rights to do what you say you have the right to do, that you're the owner of the patents, that you're the one that's in control, and so you all decide that you're going to fire all of the attorneys and all of the people that were working in this matter to try to get to the bottom of it.
Correct. And the investors, Crossbow Ventures and Wayne Huizenga, they were all part of that.
Okay.
And with that, we went to see what these lawsuits were.
Did you hire new counsel at that point?
Yeah, we fired the counsel that we don't even know is representing us. Never heard of them before because they're really paid by Proskauer because they need to make their loss. Here's what they were planning on doing, it looks like, Les, if we read the scam correct. They were going to, Proskauer, they stole the technologies to these companies that look like ours. They then were going to have a lawsuit with Proskauer with this absurd bill of, $600,000 roughly or whatever.
Right.
And then they were going to pull a bankruptcy with Utley and these other guys from Intel, Lockheed, Silicon Graphics through Real 3D, and they were going to pull the bankruptcy on these other fraudulent companies they had set up. And all of the technologies that were in the company that they were illegally transferred to
would become subject to buying.
The bankrupt company as the only asset.
Right.
And then when they folded, when Proskauer sued, they'd have a judgment. They'd go to the bankrupt company and say, "We have a judgment."
And they would own the patents. And they would get the patents as a settlement.
And they would be a part of the patents.
Yeah.
And then they rename the companies, rename the patents.
Yeah,
now,
so
part of what we discovered when we went to Harry Modes was that there were these other patents in these companies, like patents for zoom and pan on a digital camera. I mean, imagine the worth of that alone.
Right.
That was written into Brian Utley's name without any other inventors. He wasn't even there. He didn't invent anything.
Right.
So, he can invent a way out of a box.
Yeah. So here, let's go back for a second. Again, I want to clarify to the listening audience. This, first of all, my guest this afternoon is Eliot Bernstein. Eliot is it's Iviewit Technology, right? Is that what's the actual name of the company?
Well, there's 20 companies, but it's Iviewit Holdings, Iviewit Technology.
But Iviewit is IVIEWIT. If people go to Google that, they'll find out a lot about this story.
And at www.iviewit.tv.
Yeah.
There's thousands of pieces of evidence.
Okay.
There's the whole story.
Okay, so now what I want to get back to is the collusion between the New York bar and the Florida bar. You fired all these people. Now you hired new attorneys. You go through this, and tell me what the relationship is again between the New York bar and the Florida bar.
We're almost there.
Okay.
And so in LaBarga's, what happens in the billing lawsuit with Proskauer is we retain new counsel. Like
okay,
you asked.
and this lawsuit that Proskauer has created to force bankruptcy, and you lose control, and then they try and clear the bankruptcy by using the assets of the firm, and those assets are these patents, which are of great value.
And you don't know anything about those companies because they look and smell like your companies,
Right.
but none of your shareholders are owners of them.
Right.
That they're owned in, these were all done in secrecy. This was all going on behind the scenes.
Yeah,
what they were going to do probably to me is bankrupt me, force me out of business.
Yeah, it's all designed for confusion, diversion, and for
It's a complicated patent scheme to steal
exactly.
patents. Same thing they ran on Friedkin.
Right.
So we get into court with LaBarga. And
LaBarga is the judge.
Comes
LaBarga is the
case.
judge, right? LaBarga's the judge.
LaBarga's the judge who's now on the Florida Supreme Court. He was at the West Palm Beach Civil Court.
Mm-hmm.
And LaBarga, and by the way, in the crime syndicate, you get a leg up to the Supreme Court if you really do something great like he did, like throw an election or other things like block me in court.
Right.
So what did he do to me in court? We brought in new counsel, like you said, Stephen Sells out of West Palm Beach. Sells came in, and he calls some of the evidence holy grail against him in a taped message to me that's on my website.
Right.
I mean, this is a clear-cut slam dunk. We deposed the lawyers. The lawyers lie through their teeth. They're caught in perjury. Their statements to the bars later don't match up with their deposition statements, creating absolute perjury.
Right.
And so LaBarga's got all this information that these guys might be involved in a patent theft, that the attorneys, Proskauer is always representing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So Proskauer is representing themselves against Sells, and the conflict's apparent, but LaBarga's allowing the conflict. We're bringing in evidence that, they've ripped off patents, might be infiltrating the patent office, conspiracy, basically treason against the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And LaBarga ends up disarming me of
both of my counsels after. How does he get rid of your counsel?
Showed up at the courtroom for a trial.
How does he get rid of your counsel?
He would listen to that. You love this. LaBarga, we were supposed to settle, but we couldn't. So it comes to a trial.
Mm-hmm.
And at the day of the trial, I show up to a courtroom that's empty and black. I call Sells. He goes, yeah, I just went over there, and I don't know what's going on. The trial was canceled or something. So we'd also brought in another law firm, Schifrin and Barroway, out of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And they were also representing in his counsel at me, and they had just signed an LOU to represent me in all of these lawsuits against Foley, Proskauer, and everybody. They had signed an LOU on their firm's letterhead to pay me millions of dollars, become a shareholder, and fight the fight against all these lawyers. We thought they were, God-sent heroes.
That's a letter of understanding, an LOU?
Yeah, letter of understanding.
Okay.
So they have a signed contract with me to pay me millions of dollars, get a large share of the company going forward, and prosecute all these law firms and lawyers
and those millions of dollars they would earn that in the prosecution of your case.
Right, and they'd actually own a piece of my company. The LOU gives them ownership as shareholders.
Right, so they would be representing a company that they have an ownership interest in.
Correct.
Okay.
And they were taking an ownership interest to represent us, knowing that it would cost them out of pocket millions to take on these law firms.
Right, and they were willing to do that and did that.
After 2 years of researching the documents.
Right, exactly. It took a long time.
Okay, and so they come into the picture, and LaBarga says the trial was canceled, gives no reason, which the FBI guy thought was kind of strange, and disarming of my rights, and he schedules a rehearing.
A rehearing of what?
To schedule a rehearing, to reschedule the hearing that was missed.
The hearing that was canceled, they're going to have a rehearing to.
Right, and it wasn't canceled.
Yeah.
He didn't notify anybody, or we went to trial thinking there was no notice, there was no document that,
And this is after your attorneys have prepared for the trial.
Right,
the trial date is set.
Sells had done several years of work, Schifrin and Barraway several years.
Right.
And so La Barga, at the rehearing, what had happened was once I signed the LOU, Schifrin and Barraway told Sells, step out of the case. We've got it under control.
Right.
And so withdraw as counsel. So at the rehearing,
how did
Sells
get
walked
paid?
up and said to La Barga, here's my withdrawal as counsel.
How did Sells get paid? How did Sells get paid?
I can't recall.
Okay.
And so Sells put in his withdrawal.
Right. Now you're represented by this Pennsylvania law firm.
Schifrin and Barraway. The very next minute, they walk right past me, and they go up to La Barga and hand him a withdrawal. Well, Sells' withdrawal of counsel says, I'm withdrawing as counsel because Eliot's represented by someone else.
Right.
They walk right past me and hand La Barga another withdrawal of counsel. Never told me they were withdrawing as counsel, and withdrew as counsel.
For what reason? Irreconcilable differences?
No, they said that I was being represented by Sells after they had told Sells to step down.
Okay.
In writing.
Okay.
Okay. And La Barga approves that, leaving me with no counsel.
Okay.
And then he calls me from the gallery and tells me to come up, and I said, hey, I can't represent anybody. I don't know what these companies are all about. I don't know what's going on. I wasn't an officer at that point of the companies. But he screamed at me to get up there now, or else type thing. So I went up there, and he told me I have 45 days to get counsel. And I said, well, you just got rid of my counsel, and this is a complex case ready for trial. I have 45 days. What are you talking about, dude? He wouldn't bend, budge. He ruled, then the attorneys, Sells and Barraway, walked off with all my case files and had all of the case files and wouldn't give them to me during the time I could have appealed and everything else that case. So I got to the court 45 days later, and La Barga, after I begged for a few more days and everything, wouldn't give it to me. While La Barga knew about the perjuries, had the evidence of the perjuries that Rubenstein, in fact, came to his deposition, said he never heard of Eliot Bernstein and Iviewit companies. And then documents fell out of the sky at his deposition that were faxed to him that said, from Warner Brothers, we checked with Ken Rubenstein, who opined favorably on your patent.
Right.
And Rubenstein was dead at that point. Now, La Barga had that evidence.
Right.
He had Sells telling him. He had Schifrin and Barraway's LOU.
Right. So somebody got to your counsels.
Somebody got to the judge. In fact, Rubenstein, if you read his deposition, is so brazen in his lies that all he keeps saying, even when he's threatened by Sells that failing to answer is against the law in Florida, he says, take it up with the judge.
Yeah.
Real cocky.
Right.
Like, we got the judge in our pocket. You could say whatever. I could do whatever I want in this room.
Right.
And he basically tried. You should read his deposition. It's a classic piece of how lawyers are bad liars and why they're afraid of the courtroom.
Let's get to the Florida bar.
Okay.
Eliot, okay.
So La Barga throws the case.
Yeah.
He fixes it.
Right.
Takes his briefcase or boat or whatever.
Yeah.
He tells me, take it up with the Florida bar.
He tells you to take it up at the Florida bar. Okay.
Yeah, I'm like, what are you doing? You just let go of my lawyers? This one's got an LOU. I got the LOU in my pocket.
Right.
I'm like, well, what are you doing? And he's like, take it up with the bar.
Right.
And that was his closing comment. I was unbuckling my pants to give him a moon when the bailiff said that I had such a wonderful case, but not to go to jail over it. But I would have shot him a moon right there to tell him exactly what I thought of him in his court decision and his court antics.
Right.
Because it was beyond belief that a judge could overlook, massive crimes against the United States that were being exposed, crimes in the courtroom that he had firsthand evidence of.
He became a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, in fact, yes, he did. In fact, by Chris put him in. In fact, Rubenstein wrote La Barga a letter that he had his lawyer, who later ends up in the Florida bar issue, Matthew Triggs, write La Barga a letter saying that I was attempting to harass Rubenstein. who's listed in the Wachovia private placement as Iviewit Patent Counsel, and Proskauer wrote the thing.
Okay.
But they wrote to Labarga saying he didn't know anything, he never billed, he doesn't know who I am, this is a fishing expedition, the whole nonsense. And then in his deposition, he has to admit that he does know Iviewit, and he does know me, and he does, and there's documents showing that all the patents were transferred to him, even though he says that they weren't. And so he's dead, and Labarga has all that information, and this is how they buried the case.
Okay.
So he sent me to the bar.
To the Florida bar. The judge tells you to go to the Florida bar to report the attorneys who have done this to you.
And take up any grievance with him.
With them, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I think he told me the Judicial Conduct Committee, which I went to on him.
Well, that's
too.
a JQC you're talking
Yeah,
about.
and that's a
So he
complete
said,
joke, too.
so you can go. He says, go to the JQC. You can complain about me, and go to the Florida bar and complain about the attorneys.
Right.
Yeah,
Take it up with them. We've got it fixed upstairs.
Yeah, that's like sending you. It's like sending you to. I think your example was where you go to the guards. You go to the SS to complain about the guards at the.
At the concentration camp.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Okay, my guest today is Eliot Bernstein, and we're going to be right back with Eliot after this short commercial break. Don't go away. My name is Les Winston, and I host Disbar, the Florida Bar, right here on The Biz in South Florida.
The United States Trustees Program is the largest organized criminal element in the world.
In Florida, all other professionals except lawyers are governed by the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Only lawyers regulate themselves through the Florida Bar.
Because the Florida Bar is controlling all three branches of government now. We have attorneys in all three branches. There's a system out of control. There's no more check and balance.
This has created a very dangerous good old boys club and a lot of rotten apples.
Sue me.
Tune in each weekday from 2 o'clock to 3 p.m. and listen to stories of individuals who have been affected by the corruption of the Florida Bar. We want you to be aware of the problem that we have with this disciplinary agency. Join us every weekday, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. right here on the... We're back. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar. My guest this afternoon is Eliot Bernstein, and we are at the point in this long saga, but it's necessary to build the case. We need to show you that we're not dealing with, people who don't understand what's going on. We're dealing in this case with a very intelligent individual who has created an invention that's worth multi-billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, and who has been, damaged and defeated in the process by the machinery that's put in place to do just that. And now he's come full circle. He's gone through, the process of trying to recover what has been systematically plotted to be taken from him. And he gets to the point where he goes into the court to have his day in court. The courtroom is dark, and he learns that the counsel that he has hired and that have letters of understanding where they're representing him, they withdraw from his representation. He's now left without an attorney. The judge in the matter that allows this to happen, Judge Labarga, who is now a Supreme Court judge in Florida, he says, you don't like what I did, take it up with the JQC and take it up with the Florida Bar with regard to the attorneys. So now, do you do that?
I did, and just to comment on what you just said, the machinery that is not designed to do what it did. It's designed to protect me.
Yes.
And it's the one that's victimizing me. The actual machinery that's supposed to protect an inventor is actually the one stealing from him.
Right.
So all of the protections an inventor has are violated by those entrusted to protecting them. Okay,
right.
Yes. And then at that point, with Labarga's recommendation off to the Florida Bar.
Right.
And at the Florida Bar, Proskauer, again, representing themselves with Proskauer partner Matthew Triggs, who fails to follow the rules of the Florida Bar, which says that if you were an officer of the Florida Bar for a period of 1 year, you're blacklisted from representing any cases in the Florida Bar. Remember, Matthew Triggs is also in a civil case with me.
Right.
The Proskauer fraudulent billing lawsuit.
What is Matthew Triggs?
Hold
on a second. What is Matthew Triggs' relationship? He's the prosecuting attorney for the Florida Bar?
He was a officer of their committees.
He's a member of the Board of Governors?
You'll have to look it up. I have it his exact position, but it was an officer position with the bar.
Okay, let me go back for a second. You file a complaint against whom?
Proskauer Rose, Christopher Wheeler, Bill Dick in Virginia.
Okay,
and then some
guys. He's a Virginia attorney, is that right?
But the first one is Florida.
Okay, so you file a complaint against Proskauer Rose. Let's just focus on them, and you allege in your complaint against Proskauer Rose that they've done what?
Stole the patents.
That they stole the patents.
They violated conflict laws. They violated every.
And you provide proof to the Florida bar, and you sign that under the oath under penalty of perjury.
Thousands of pages signed under the penalty of perjury.
Okay, and so you submit that to the Florida bar as a complaint against these attorneys. And what did you hope to accomplish with that?
Finding out, I also filed with the JQC. Yeah. And my attempt was to get these lawyers prosecuted for what they had done in the courtrooms and what they had done to me at the Florida bar, and then go back into a civil court with criminal complaints. In
other words, you were hoping that the Florida bar would prove that these attorneys would take your evidence and would hold the proper evidentiary hearings and the proper grievance hearings to determine that what you presented to them was accurate and truthful, and that these attorneys, in fact, violated the Florida bar rules and committed crimes, and therefore whatever was being done in the courts would have to be stayed because of the fraud or the wrongdoings of these attorneys. That was your hope.
Correct.
Okay, and going to the JQC was you were hoping that the JQC would say that this judge had violated his judicial canons, and as a result of that, whatever was done by the judge should be voided ab initio. Okay, and so this is your hope, that you're going to them to straighten out this problem of these, what you consider, and anybody would consider listening to this, egregious acts on the part of a judge, egregious acts on the part of attorneys against you. And so you file a lengthy complaint with the Florida bar against Proskauer Rose, among others, and as a result of and what happens after your complaint is filed?
Well, the Florida bar lets Proskauer attorneys represent Proskauer, and Matthew Triggs, the guy who's representing the civil case for Proskauer, represents the Florida bar complaint.
Okay.
Now, that's a conflict in itself that precludes him under the rules of the Florida bar from doing that.
Right, but
but there are no rules.
Yeah, okay.
And they further allow him to violate the canon that precludes him from handling any complaints after sitting on one of these committees of the Florida bar for a period of 1 year.
Okay.
So he violated that.
Okay.
That's the one I told you about where later they try to write me saying under this new law, well, not even new law, under this law, but what he did was okay, but it wasn't a law, it hadn't been ratified, it was draft language that they threw back at me, trying to defeat it. And again, they don't ask Matthew Triggs to put forth a response. They write his response for him. So actually, the state Supreme Court bar agency, which is the bar is an aegis of the Supreme Court, it's directly under, it is a Supreme Court entity, is doing the defense for these guys. Meaning, instead of saying to Matthew Triggs, are you conflicted, did you violate, they write me a letter, the bar, on the official letterhead of the Supreme Court, saying, no, he didn't violate it. He shoulda, coulda, woulda, but he didn't. And so, it was the craziest thing in the world.
So they say we don't find any probable cause. And
it's dismissed on review.
It's what?
Dismissed on review, meaning they didn't investigate it.
Yeah.
They reviewed it and dismissed it, which was the first response. Now,
did they ever ask you to testify?
No.
Did they ever?
They don't give you any rights.
Yeah, and when they dismissed it, then what did you do? You went for another shot?
Well, no. When they dismissed it, it was right about that time. Literally out of the sky fell news that Matthew Triggs was violating, and that we had filed after the Florida ones New York complaints, where again Proskauer Rose partner, former president of the New York State Bar, head of the ABA ethics Division, Stephen C. Crane of Proskauer Rose, represents Kenneth Rubenstein and Proskauer in my complaints in New York.
You can't get away from these guys.
Wait, Crane is also an officer, a major officer at the First Department where the complaints are filed.
Right.
He's totally precluded from handling them. Of course, they don't tell you any of this.
Right. So let me go back to the Florida bar because that's the subject of this show, and I want to get this point across because we're going to come to the end, and I want to end this segment with the outcome from the Florida bar and what we think about that going forward. Yeah. What generally happens is you file a complaint with the Florida bar, then the Florida bar lets the attorney know that the complaint is filed against them. The attorneys file a response, and then the Florida bar makes a decision based on that. And what happened in this case is the Florida bar dismissed it under the review of the complaint.
And the responses submitted by the attorneys were submitted by attorneys who were violating Florida bar rules.
Okay, so what did you do then?
I complained about the Florida bar people who were involved.
Did you have an attorney with you? Did you have an attorney that did this, or you did it on your own?
I did it on my own.
Okay, so your rights as a citizen in Florida, you know that an attorney has done wrong, and you know that these are Florida attorneys. You know that they've done something wrong. You have the evidence against them to prove that they've done something wrong. You take that evidence, you send it to the Florida bar because you want the Florida bar to investigate what you're telling them as the investigative resource of the citizens of Florida with regard to attorney complaints. You go to them with this information. They send the information to the attorney. The attorney responds, and as a result of their review of your information, which is given to them under oath, under penalty of perjury, they decide that there's nothing there that they need to prosecute. And then you discover that the person that was involved with protecting the other side, he shouldn't have been there because he's violating Florida bar rules. And now you go back to the Florida bar again and complain against him. Is that right?
Correct. And they write a letter saying, using law that isn't law yet, hasn't been ratified or approved by the Supreme Court for the bar rules, and try to dismiss that he should have sought the rule they wrote. The language they said that he could get approval to represent in conflict if he checked with the commission.
Right. And
that wasn't really a rule.
Yeah, they manufactured something before it was anything to prevent you from having your right to correct what was wrong that this guy did, that Matthew Trigg did wrong in protecting Proskauer Rose. And they won't even give you that. They manufacture something to prevent that.
And the Triggs complaint, they didn't formally docket or anything because it involved now all of the Florida bar people who were involved in allowing it after they knew and that's the issue of the corruption. And that's one of the things that I want to ask you as a final statement. Would you state unequivocally that you have been denied honest services by the Florida bar and that you have suffered from obstruction of justice by the Florida bar and by the individuals who are in the Florida bar, the officials in the Florida bar? Would you say that that's correct? 100%, absolutely correct.
We are going to pursue a course of action. We're going to try to force the impaneled grand jury here in the state of Florida that's been impaneled by Governor Christ to investigate the corruption in the judiciary.
Well, remember that La Barga is on that commission, and Christ appointed La Barga to the Supreme Court.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to push their hand to try to get what's necessary to. We're either going to prove that they're full of baloney with this whole thing with the grand jury, or they're not, and we're going to try to carry that through in that system, and that has nothing to do with what you're doing elsewhere. It's just what we need to do here in Florida to correct this problem, to try and correct the problem. This is a monumental problem in Florida that the citizens of Florida have to wake up to, because not everybody has this kind of a case. Not everybody has this kind of a size of a case. But people are damaged daily in other ways, either through guardianships, divorces, any dealings that they have in the courts with lawyers who are a problem, and they can't get them resolved if they're in the clique, if they're in the big old boys club. Thank you very much, Eliot. I really appreciate the time that you've spent with me here on Disbar, the Florida Bar. Your story is an amazing story, and we will continue to be in touch with you and stay tuned in to that case, and hopefully we'll be able to get something done here in Florida.
Well, thank you very much for your heroic effort.
Thank you, Eliot. And we will talk to you again soon. This is Disbar, the Florida Bar. I'm your host, Les Winston. This closes another chapter of the victims of the Florida Bar's corruption. We hope you understand how devastating this can be to any citizen in Florida. Your rights are being denied you, and this needs to change. We'll be with you again, same time, same station tomorrow, right here on The Biz, the fastest growing station in South Florida.
My job is to make sure that you do your job. So my jurisdiction's pretty much in your face.